the dimensional rift tore open without warning. On Camino, the planet of perpetual storms and cloning facilities, a pillar of impossible light erupted from the sky above the primary production complex. Republic engineers monitoring atmospheric conditions screamed warnings into their comlinks seconds too late. The light was neither plasma nor energy. It existed in a space between realities, a wound in the fabric of existence itself. Alarms shrieked across the facility. Clone soldiers scrambled to defensive positions, training and protocol overriding confusion. But there was no enemy to fight, no droid army descending. The light simply was, burning through the gray Kaminoan sky like a scar being torn open and closed simultaneously. When the light collapsed, what remained defied immediate explanation. A figure stood amid the wreckage of the landing zone, a massive man, pale-skinned, marked with intricate tattoos that seemed to writhe in the stormlight. His bare chest heaved with breath that came hard and fast, as though he'd been fighting moments before. In his hands, twin blades that gleamed with an otherworldly sheen, serrated edges catching the light like teeth. Behind him, an axe of impossible design lay half-buried in Kaminoan rock, metal that glowed with an inner cold, radiating a supernatural chill visible in the humid air. The man's eyes, pale, burning, infinitely ancient, swept across the landing zone. Clone soldiers, Kaminoan architecture, technology that sparked and smoked from the rift's passage. His hand tightened on one of his blades, and the metal sang with a terrible sound. "Where?" he growled, his voice like stone grinding against stone. "What realm is this?" Clone Captain Rex was first to respond, hand raised to hold his troops in check. Through his helmet's visor, thermal imaging showed the stranger's body radiating heat in irregular patterns, no standard biometric signature. "Unidentified contact," Rex transmitted to command. "Standing by for orders." The figure's head snapped toward Rex with predatory speed. The clone's hand moved to his blaster instinctively, but something in the stranger's gaze, something primal and recognizable even across the gulf of unknown species and cultures, made him hesitate. This was a warrior, not a droid, not a mercenary, not a creature following programming. A warrior. "I am Kratos," the figure said, his accent thick with languages dead for centuries. "God of war. And I have been pulled from battle." He retrieved his axe, the weapon's frost magic causing condensation to bloom around him despite Camino's humidity. "The gods are not finished with me then. Show me what realm this is, and tell me what powers rule here. I will end them as I have ended all others." The Kaminoan facility erupted into coordinated chaos. Protocols demanded immediate evacuation of civilians. The military liaison officer, a grizzled Republic captain, authorized full lockdown of the production complex. Clone soldiers formed defensive perimeters, blasters raised, though no one could shake the sense that this might be like aiming at a star and expecting it to fall. Within minutes, a distress signal reached the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Master Yoda felt it first, not through sight or sound, but through the Force itself. A nothing. An absence so profound it was almost painful. He'd sensed death before, sensed darkness, sensed the chaos of war. But this was different. This was a being whose existence the Force simply didn't recognize. "Disturbance on Camino there is," Yoda announced to the assembled council, his ears folding slightly, a sign of deep concern. Present in the Force, this entity is not, and yet, powerful beyond measure, it feels. Anakin Skywalker leaned forward in his chair, excitement flickering across his face. "A Sith? Could it be? Unknown, this is," Yoda interrupted. "Sent to investigate, Obi-Wan, and you will be. Capture or communicate you must. kill, only if necessary. Obi-Wan Kenobi nodded, though his expression was skeptical. Master, if this being can't be sensed through the Force, how do we even begin to? Trust your training. You must, Yoda said. And trust, perhaps, in the Force itself. Answers it will provide, if patient you remain. 2 hours later, Anakin and Obi-Wan descended toward Kamino in a Republic cruiser, cutting through the planet's perpetual storm clouds. Below, the cloning facilities sprawled like mechanical cities against the white-capped waters. And in the landing zone, contained by physical barriers and clone soldiers who clearly hoped the barriers were enough, was Kratos. He hadn't moved, hadn't tried to escape, hadn't attacked anyone else. He simply stood there, studying the technology around him with the methodical patience of a hunter assessing prey. His twin blades were still in his hands, but held at rest, not threat. The Jedi have arrived, Anakin said through the facility's external speakers. His voice transmitted to the containment zone. Release your weapons, and we can speak. Kratos looked up. His pale eyes found the source of the voice, the observation platform where Anakin stood. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, deliberately, he drove both blades point first into the Kaminoan stone beneath his feet. I yield to know what rule here, Kratos called out. But not to servitude. I have served gods. I will not serve again. When Anakin and Obi-Wan entered the containment zone personally, lightsabers ignited as a precaution rather than immediate threat. They understood immediately why the clone soldiers had seemed so uncertain. Kratos was enormous. Not through any trick of perspective. He genuinely towered over even Anakin, his frame built for warfare across millennia. The tattoos covering his body weren't decorative. They seemed to pulse with meaning, almost like scars that had learned to walk. When Obi-Wan extended his hand in a Jedi gesture of peace, Kratos tilted his head, studying the gesture with the intensity of someone reading scripture. Kratos, Obi-Wan said carefully. I am Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is Anakin Skywalker. We represent the Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic. Order, Kratos repeated, and something flickered across his face, recognition or bitter memory. And Republic. I know of neither, but I know of orders. Gods who command, mortals who obey. He stepped closer, and Obi-Wan felt the temperature drop slightly, the Leviathan axe's residual frost magic chilling the air around its wielder. Is this what rules your galaxy? Gods playing at order? We don't have gods here, Anakin said, and there was something almost curious in his voice. We have the Force. It's different from what you might expect. Kratos' eyes narrowed. Force? Magic by another name? Possibly, Obi-Wan admitted. Will you tell us how you arrived here? How you came to be on Kamino? For the next hour, in a containment zone turned interrogation chamber, Kratos recounted his story. He spoke of the Norse realms, of his war against the gods themselves, of Fimbulwinter's harsh trials, and the freedom he'd finally found in a world without divine tyranny. He described the moment he'd been torn from reality mid-battle, pulled through a rift of light and chaos, emerging here on this water world of clone soldiers and Kaminoan technology. The Force, Kratos said, it is not the magic of the 9 realms. It moves differently. It feels... He paused, searching for words in a language that wasn't quite made for Star Wars concepts. Like static, like something beneath the surface, watching. Your Jedi feel this? Constantly, Anakin confirmed. It's how we sense danger, move faster, predict outcomes. For us, the Force is everything. Life, connection, balance. Kratos stood and walked to the wall of the containment chamber, placing his hand against the transparisteel. Outside, Kamino's storm raged, lightning splitting the clouds. In the Norse realms, such power would make you a god. Here it makes you servants of an invisible master." His hand curled into a fist. I did not escape one form of tyranny to bow to another. Obi-Wan and Anakin exchanged a look. This being, this Kratos, was not hostile out of malice. He was hostile out of principle. The Jedi serve the Republic, and the Republic serves its people, Obi-Wan offered. Though even as he said it, he heard the hollow ring of words spoken in times of war. We maintain balance and peace where possible. You are at war, Kratos replied simply. I can feel it. Soldiers dying, nations fighting. And you maintain balance. He turned from the window, and there was something in his eyes, not anger exactly, but profound disappointment. Your order has already failed. The question is not whether to serve your force and your order. The question is, will you allow me to fight for something that matters? Before Obi-Wan could respond, an alert blared through the facility. A clone soldier's voice crackled over the communication system. Contact on approach. Multiple separatist dropships inbound. General Grievous leading advance forces. Kratos' head tilted toward the sound. He retrieved his twin blades from where he'd planted them, the weapons singing as they were drawn free. The enemies of your order? One of them, Anakin said, activating his lightsaber. Grievous is a separatist commander, kills Jedi for sport. A slow smile spread across Kratos' pale features, the expression of someone who'd finally found solid ground in an alien world. Then we share a common enemy, at least for now. Show me this, Grievous, and I will show you what a god of war can do against your separatists. The roof of the containment chamber exploded inward as B-2 super battle droids descended on repulsor platforms, blasters blazing. Obi-Wan ignited his lightsaber, deflecting bolts back toward their source. Anakin moved with force-enhanced speed, his lightsaber weaving a pattern of devastating defense. And between them, Kratos moved. He didn't use the Force, didn't need to. He simply moved, faster than beings that size should be capable of, with precision honed by 10,000 battles across mythological ages. His blades of chaos met the super droid's armor and shattered it. His Leviathan axe, hurled with godly strength, cleaved through 3 droids in a single throw before returning to his hand, drawn by enchantments beyond Republic understanding. In 30 seconds, the first wave was scrap metal. In 45 seconds, General Grievous himself descended into the chamber, his Magna Guard bodyguards flanking him. The cyborg commander's yellow eyes swept across the scene, taking in the destruction, the 3 warriors standing against impossible odds. Interesting, Grievous growled, his voice like metal grinding. The Jedi have found a new pet. I am no one's pet, Kratos replied, and Grievous, who'd faced Jedi, Sith, legends of the battlefield itself, heard something in that statement that made him take a step back. The duel that followed would be analyzed by military strategists for years, though classified as merely separatist engagement on Kamino. Grievous's lightsaber technique was lethal, his mechanical body a perfect instrument of death. Obi-Wan and Anakin fought with the discipline and power the Jedi Order could grant. But Kratos fought as a god, raw, fundamental, unchained by philosophy or form. When Grievous's arm was nearly torn from its socket by the Leviathan axe, when the cyborg commander realized he was facing something that couldn't be calculated, couldn't be predicted, he did something unexpected. He retreated. The super droids covered his escape, dropships lifting off even as their commander fled. In the silence that followed, Obi-Wan and Anakin lowered their lightsabers. You fight well, Jedi, Kratos said, breathing hard but not exhausted. Better than I expected from servants of an invisible power, but you rely too much on this force. Your enemy was right in front of you, and you still needed the Force to find him." Anakin bristled slightly, but Obi-Wan held up a hand. "You survived the rift between realities. You don't exist in the Force's perception. You've just proven yourself capable of fighting alongside the Jedi." He paused. "What will you do now?" Kratos retrieved his axe and looked out toward Kamino's storm-racked horizon. Somewhere out there, Republic ships were being assembled. Clone soldiers were being trained. A war was being fought with sentient beings bred specifically for warfare. "Now," Kratos said slowly, "I learn about your galaxy, and if what I suspect is true, if the soldiers I saw here are slaves like I once was, then I will teach them freedom." He didn't know it yet, but in that moment, Kratos set in motion events that would ripple through the Clone Wars and beyond. The ghost of Sparta had arrived in Star Wars, and nothing would ever be quite the same. The Jedi Temple's archives were vast beyond comprehension, millennia of knowledge compressed into holocrons, data files, and physical records stretching across entire wings of the sprawling structure. But Master Yoda sat in the council chamber, his ears folded in deep concentration, listening to Obi-Wan's full report on Kratos with the kind of profound silence that meant nothing good. "A being outside the Force," Ki-Adi-Mundi said, his elongated head tilting in confusion. "This contradicts everything we understand. All life generates the Force. All consciousness participates in it. How is such a thing possible?" "Unknown, it remains," Yoda replied, his gnarled fingers steepled before him. "But understand it, we must. Threat or asset this Kratos represents. Decide, we must, which he will become." Anakin paced the chamber's curved wall, his energy barely contained. He defeated Grievous in direct combat, not through Force technique, not through lightsaber training, but through skill, raw, brutal skill that's been honed across centuries. His voice carried something that made several council members exchange glances, admiration perhaps, or something closer to envy. If we could train him, if we could show him how to channel the Force. "No," Obi-Wan said firmly. He made it clear. He won't be trained, won't be controlled. He cooperated against the Separatists because they represented immediate opposition. But his real interest lies with the clone soldiers on Kamino. "The clones?" Master Coleman Kekaj frowned. "They are soldiers of the Republic, necessary tools of war." "To us, yes," Obi-Wan acknowledged. "But Kratos sees them as enslaved. His entire existence, his entire motivation stems from rebellion against slavery and imposed servitude. If we deny him access to the clones, if we try to contain him..." He trailed off, but the implication hung in the air, like a dropped blade waiting to fall. Yoda's ears perked forward slightly. "Predict his response. You can, Obi-Wan." "He would see it as tyranny," Obi-Wan said quietly. "And he would resist, violently if necessary." Anakin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The council chamber fell silent except for the ambient hum of Coruscant's endless cityscape beyond the transparistile. Somewhere in that sprawling metropolis of lights and skyscrapers, the war continued. Republic forces and separatist drones clashed across 100 worlds. Clone soldiers died in numbers that should have shattered military morale, yet somehow the well kept refilling. More clones were always ready. "Allow it, we should," Yoda finally declared. "Observe, we will. On Kamino, station a Jedi liaison. Report on this Kratos' activities. If threat he becomes, respond we shall. But force the issue now, we will not." It was a decision that would echo across the Clone Wars' remaining years. 3 days later, Obi-Wan returned to Kamino with specific authorization. Kratos could move freely within the cloning facility complex, provided he agreed to periodic check-ins with Jedi observers. The arrangement was loose enough to feel like freedom, and structured enough to satisfy the Council's need for oversight. Kratos didn't care about the bureaucratic framework. He cared only that he'd been given access. The first thing he did was walk through the cloning chambers themselves, the vast, pristine rooms where thousands of clone soldiers floated in gestation tanks, their development accelerated through Kaminoan science and expertise. Rows upon rows of identical faces, identical bodies, suspended in amber liquid that sustained their growth. It was, Kratos would later describe it, like walking through a gallery of slavery made manifest. Captain Rex found him standing before one of the tanks, his massive frame nearly filling the observation corridor, his pale eyes fixed on the floating clone within. "That's CT-5555, Rex said, his voice carefully neutral through his helmet. "Still in development. Another standard cycle, and he'll be combat ready." The clone paused. "Sir, Kratos, I've been authorized to answer any questions you have about clones. Protocol says we're tools of the Republic. But I get the sense you don't see it that way." Kratos didn't move his gaze from the tank. What would this one become, if not a soldier? Rex's answer came with the flat resignation of someone who'd never been allowed to wonder such things. "Doesn't matter. That's not what he is. He's grown for combat. That's his purpose. That's all the purpose a clone needs." "No," Kratos said, and the word carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Purpose is chosen. Purpose is earned, not given like chains wrapped in uniform." He finally turned to look at Rex, and the clone captain saw something in the ghost of Sparta's eyes that made him stand straighter. "How many like this one exist? Floating in tanks, waiting to become tools?" "Millions," Rex answered. "Hundreds of millions eventually. The growth acceleration chambers can create a full battalion every standard month. Kaminoan efficiency." Kratos was silent for a long moment. Then, "Take me to the training grounds." What Kratos observed over the next week transformed his understanding of the Clone Wars. These soldiers, bred, grown, and programmed with behavior conditioning, possessed consciousness and will, yet they were constrained by protocols so deeply embedded in their psychology that many never questioned the constraints. Most, anyway. Rex was different, so was a handful of others, clones who'd been in service long enough to develop individual personalities, quirks, and most importantly, doubts. They were the ones Kratos gravitated toward, the ones he began eating meals with, training alongside, and most crucially, talking to. "Do you ever question why?" Kratos asked one evening in a recreation chamber where a dozen clones played sabacc cards and drank kaf. The question was directed at no one specifically, yet seemed to demand an answer. "Question what?" a clone named Boyle asked, not looking up from his cards. "Your existence, your purpose. The fact that you were created without choice, for a war you did not start, serving a government you did not elect." The card game faltered. A few clones exchanged glances. Then Rex stood and gestured for the others to leave. Once the chamber was clear, except for Rex, Kratos, and two other clones, Cody and a younger soldier named Fives, Rex spoke. "We talk about it sometimes," Rex admitted, "especially after missions, when we come back and we're the only survivors from a full battalion. You start wondering if this is what we were meant for, if there's something more." He paused. "But it doesn't matter. We are what we are. We follow orders. That's the code." "Code can be rewritten," Kratos said. "I learned that when I broke the chains of godly servitude. The code exists only because you believe it does." "It's not that simple," Cody said, his tone respectful but firm. "We're clones. We were made to serve. There's no universe where we're anything else." Kratos stood and walked to the viewport where Kamino's endless waters stretched below, battered by perpetual storms. There is always a choice. Even if the choice is to accept the chains willingly, it is still a choice. The burden of freedom is that someone must choose it. Five stepped forward, younger than the others, his mind not yet as calcified by protocol. If we rebelled, what then? We'd be deserters. The Republic would hunt us. The Republic, Kratos said slowly, is at war with itself and calls it policy. It sends you to die for causes you didn't create, and you accept this because you believe you have no alternative. He turned to face them, his ancient eyes burning with intensity. I tell you true, there is always an alternative. Some paths are harder than others, some cost more than others, but they exist. That night, reports began filtering back to the Jedi observers on Kamino. Kratos was conducting unauthorized gatherings with clone soldiers. He was making statements that could be interpreted as seditious. He was undermining military discipline. Obi-Wan, stationed at the facility as the official Jedi liaison, found himself in an impossible position. The reports were technically accurate, but they missed the essential truth. Kratos wasn't trying to stage a military coup. He was simply teaching these enslaved beings that they could think for themselves. He was teaching them about freedom. The Council will want him removed, Cody informed Obi-Wan during a private conversation. Command is already filing complaints. They say he's destabilizing clone morale. Is he? Obi-Wan asked. Yes, Cody admitted, but not in the way they mean. We're not becoming unreliable. We're becoming aware, and Command doesn't like that. Obi-Wan understood the problem immediately. The clones, millions of them, were the backbone of the Republic's military capability. If even a fraction began questioning their purpose, began seeing themselves as individuals rather than interchangeable units, the entire military structure could unravel. It was politically untenable, military impossible, essential to the war effort that clones remain compliant. Yet Kratos was right. It was a form of slavery, a subtle one, buried under layers of programming and propaganda and necessity, but slavery nonetheless. The Jedi General found Kratos in the training grounds at dawn, practicing combat forms with a ferocity that made watching clones instinctively retreat to safer distances. The ghost of Sparta moved through combat sequences honed across 1,000 years, his weapons singing through the air with lethal precision. Your presence is creating complications, Obi-Wan said, not bothering with preamble. Good, Kratos replied, continuing his forms. Stagnation breeds tyranny. Complications breed change. Change that the Republic isn't prepared to accept, Obi-Wan countered. These clones are soldiers. They have a duty. They are slaves, Kratos said flatly, finally stopping his practice. I have worn slavery. I have fought it across ages. I recognize it when I see it, regardless of the uniform it wears. He turned to face Obi-Wan fully. Your Republic claims to value freedom, yet it has manufactured an entire population bred for obedience. You tell me, is this not slavery by another name? It's complicated, Obi-Wan said, and heard the weakness in his own words. No, Kratos replied. It is simple. You simply do not wish to acknowledge it. He retrieved his Leviathan axe and blades of chaos, securing them on his body with practiced efficiency. The question now becomes, what will you do? Will you report me? Will the Jedi attempt to silence this truth I have spoken? It was the moment where everything balanced. Obi-Wan stood at the precipice of choice, much like the clones Kratos had awakened. He could report this to the Council. He could recommend Kratos' detainment or exile. He could restore military discipline and protect the Republic's strategic position. Or he could acknowledge that the ghost of Sparta, for all his alien perspective and brutal honesty, had revealed a truth the Jedi had been avoiding for years. "I won't report you," Obi-Wan said quietly. "But the military will. Command won't tolerate this interference much longer. The Council will have to make a choice." "Then I will make mine as well," Kratos said. "If they come to silence me, they will find I do not silence easily, but I will not take the first step toward violence. I am tired of needless war." He walked past Obi-Wan toward the cloning facility's exit. "I will continue my work with the clones who wish to listen. I will teach them that they are more than their programming. And when the choice comes, when the moment arrives where they must decide between obedience and freedom, they will be ready." Obi-Wan watched him go, understanding in that moment that Kratos had already set events in motion that no single Jedi, no council, no military command could fully contain. The ghost of Sparta hadn't invaded the Star Wars galaxy seeking conquest or dominion, but he had invaded it with ideas, and ideas, Obi-Wan knew, were far more dangerous than any weapon. The first seeds of the clone revolution had been planted, and they would grow in ways no one could predict. The crystalline spires of the Separatist command center on Geonosis rose from rust-colored sands like teeth from a predator's jaw. Count Dooku stood upon a platform overlooking the droid factories, vast mechanical complexes that churned out B-1 battle droids by the thousands every cycle. The Sith Lord's aged fingers traced the air as he contemplated the latest intelligence reports, his centuries of force sensitivity tuned to the subtle vibrations of galactic politics and power. General Grievous entered with his characteristic metallic gait, his organic eyes glowing yellow within his cyborg frame. "Report," Dooku commanded, not bothering to turn. "The Jedi have deployed a new asset on Kamino," Grievous said, his voice like grinding gears. "Unknown origin, unknown capabilities. It defeated me in combat, my lord. Nearly severed my arm." Dooku turned slowly, his aristocratic features registering genuine interest. "Describe it." As Grievous detailed his encounter with Kratos, Dooku's weathered face grew increasingly thoughtful. A being beyond the Force, operating at godly power levels, uninterested in conventional motivation. The Sith Lord had spent centuries manipulating ambition and desire, turning those forces like sculpted instruments. But what did one offer to someone who'd already transcended the need for power? "This is intriguing," Dooku mused. "Send word to our operatives on Kamino. I want complete intelligence on this creature, his methods, his relationships, his ideological stance. And Grievous, prepare a strike team, not to capture him, not yet, simply to observe." On Kamino, Kratos was unaware of Separatist interest, though part of him, the ancient warrior's instinct, sensed complications gathering like storm clouds. But his focus remained on what he'd begun to understand was the true moral crisis of this galaxy: the clones. Over 2 weeks, his informal gatherings had grown. What started as conversations with Rex and a handful of others had expanded to include dozens, then hundreds of clone soldiers. They met in recreation chambers, in training grounds during off hours, in the vast hangar bays where Republic gunships were maintained. And Kratos, with the patience of someone who'd spent millennia studying rebellion and freedom, shared his perspective. He never advocated outright mutiny. He never demanded they abandon their posts or refuse orders. Instead, he taught them something far more revolutionary: self-awareness. "A soldier without consciousness is merely a weapon," Kratos explained to a gathering of over 200 clones in a secondary hangar. "A weapon obeys without question, without choice, without will. Are you weapons, or are you soldiers?" "What's the difference?" a young clone named Tup asked innocently. "A weapon doesn't ask questions," an older clone, Echo, answered before Kratos could. "A soldier understands what they're fighting for. A soldier can make judgment calls. A soldier has autonomy." Precisely, Kratos nodded. The Kaminoans created you as weapons. Your programming, your growth acceleration, your synchronized training, all designed to make you interchangeable, predictable, controllable. But consciousness disrupts those designs. Self-awareness is the enemy of perfect obedience. You're telling us to disobey, Cody said, his commander's pragmatism asserting itself. You know what happens to clone deserters? Yes, Kratos replied. I know. You will be hunted. You will be abandoned. You may die. Freedom has a price. Always it has a price. He paused, letting the weight of that truth settle over the assembled clones. But I also know what happens if you do not claim your freedom. You will spend your accelerated lives fighting wars you didn't choose, dying for causes you don't understand, and never once believing that you could be anything other than what they made you to be. The clones fell silent. Rex stood in the back of the gathering, his hand resting on his blaster, torn between his loyalty to the Republic and something Kratos was awakening in him, a question that, once asked, could never be unasked. What would you have us do? Rex finally asked. For now, nothing, Kratos said. Observe, think, question your orders silently. Plant seeds of doubt in the minds of other clones. When the moment comes, and it will come, when a choice presents itself between blind obedience and conscious will, you will be ready to choose. But Kratos' words traveled through communication networks and informal channels. Reports reached military command. Urgent messages were sent to Coruscant, and within days, Admiral Yularen arrived on Kamino with explicit orders. Kratos was to be contained, controlled, or removed. Obi-Wan received the directive with a mixture of resignation and frustration. He found Kratos in the observation chamber overlooking the cloning tanks, much as he'd been when they first truly spoke. The military wants you detained, Obi-Wan said without preamble. The Jedi Council is divided on how to respond. The Republic's strategic position depends on clone reliability. Your presence is being defined as a security threat. Then they will attempt to move against me, Kratos said calmly. They will, Obi-Wan confirmed, and I can't stop them. The Jedi serve the Republic. I can delay, perhaps, but not prevent. Kratos turned to face the Jedi General, and Obi-Wan was struck again by the sheer presence of this being, the weight of millennia of conflict and survival radiating from him like heat from a forge. Can you do something? Kratos asked. What? Warn the clones. Tell them that Admiral Yularen intends to separate them from me, to silence what they've learned. Give them time to prepare, not to resist militarily, but to accept the truth and internalize it. Let them know they are observed, judged for their loyalty, and measured against standards they never consented to. Obi-Wan wanted to refuse. Protocol demanded it. The Jedi Order's position in the Republic required it. But he'd spent enough time around Kratos to understand something fundamental. The ghost of Sparta had revealed the machinery of their own servitude, and the only way to stop him was to become the very tyranny he opposed. I'll do it, Obi-Wan agreed. Admiral Yularen arrived with full authority and a detachment of shock troops. The operation was planned with military precision. Kratos would be isolated during his meditation period, a routine he'd established, surrounded and presented with a choice between voluntary detention or forced restraint. What Yularen didn't anticipate was that every clone soldier on Kamino would suddenly become far less cooperative. Orders took longer to fulfill. Equipment went missing from armories. Clones reported simultaneously for leave, creating scheduling chaos. And most critically, when Yularen's shock troops moved to isolate Kratos, they found themselves surrounded by hundreds of clone soldiers who placed themselves between the Ghost of Sparta and the Admiral. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't even technically insubordination. The clones simply exercised their right to assembly, to presence, to solidarity. They moved as one, not through the Force or any external control, but through the simple unity of conscious choice. "Stand down," Yularen commanded, his voice cold and military. "This is an order." "Sir," Rex stepped forward, removing his helmet to reveal his individual face, a statement in itself. "With respect, sir, we request clarification. Are you ordering us to abandon our comrade? To support the detention of someone who has fought alongside us?" "That's not your decision to make, Captain," Yularen replied. "You follow orders." "We do," Rex agreed. "And we will. But we're requesting you clarify the order, because if you're ordering us to stand down, we will. But we won't feel good about it, and we won't forget it." It was subtle. It was perfectly within the bounds of military protocol, and it was devastating to Yularen's command authority. If he forced the issue, he'd have to arrest hundreds of clones, creating exactly the kind of instability that Kratos had warned of. If he backed down, he would be seen as weak, as unable to maintain discipline. Obi-Wan arrived before Yularen could make his decision. "Admiral," the Jedi General said, his voice carrying the weight of Council authority. "The Council has reconsidered the situation. They request that rather than detention, Kratos be assigned to an active combat theater. His abilities could prove valuable in the ongoing campaign against the Separatists." It was a brilliant political maneuver, and Yularen recognized it as such. By assigning Kratos to a war zone, rather than containing him, the Jedi accomplished multiple objectives. They appeared to respect military discipline. They removed Kratos from Kamino and the clones. They utilized his considerable abilities against their enemies, and they placed him in a situation where his survival would be tested against impossible odds. The Admiral nodded slowly. "Very well. But he leaves within the day. I want him deployed to the Outer Rim campaign. The fighting there is intense." Kratos, standing amid his gathered clones, felt the moment shift. He'd accomplished what he came to do. He'd awakened consciousness in beings designed for unconsciousness. He'd planted the seeds that would grow into something neither the Republic nor the Separatists could fully control. "I will go," he told Yularen simply. "But know this, what has begun here will not end. The clones now know themselves. That knowledge cannot be unlearned." That night before departure, Kratos met with Rex and a small circle of clone officers in a secure chamber. "What now?" Rex asked. "We're back to following orders." "You follow orders," Kratos agreed. "But you do so with eyes open. You understand now that you are more than machines, more than interchangeable parts. When the moment comes, and it will come, when you must choose between blind obedience and conscious will, you will remember this conversation. You will remember that you can choose." He placed his hand on Rex's shoulder, a gesture of warrior-to-warrior respect. "The Jedi believe the Force controls destiny. I have learned that this may be true, but I have also learned that even within destiny, there is choice, especially within choice." The next morning, Kratos boarded a Republic military transport headed for the Outer Rim. Obi-Wan came to see him off. "You've changed things here," Obi-Wan said. "The Council is aware. They're not pleased, but they're aware. Change is always unwelcome to those invested in the current order," Kratos replied. "But it is necessary. Even the Jedi will come to understand that eventually." As the transport lifted off, leaving Kamino behind, Kratos felt the Force in ways he hadn't before. Not through midi-chlorian sensitivity, but through direct intuition, the sense that larger events were being set in motion. The war was escalating. Palpatine's plans were entering new phases. And somewhere in the heart of the Republic, Anakin Skywalker was making choices that would ripple across the galaxy. Kratos had come to this strange galaxy as a warrior seeking peace. Instead, He'd found that peace was impossible while slavery remained. And so, headed toward the Outer Rim's bloodiest battlefields, the ghost of Sparta prepared for war once more, not because he wanted it. The Outer Rim burned. On Megiddo, a frozen world of ice sheets and mineral deposits, the Clone Wars reached one of its most brutal crescendos. Republic forces under Jedi General Stas Ali clashed against separatist droid armies in temperatures that would kill an unprotected organic being in minutes. Snow fell thick and heavy, obscuring vision, turning the battlefield into a white hell where survival depended on thermal regulators and stubborn determination. Kratos arrived with reinforcement contingents, deployed directly into the heart of the fighting. The moment his transport touched down, he understood this war's true nature in ways that abstract conversations on Kamino never could. This wasn't strategic positioning or political maneuvering. This was industrial slaughter. Thousands of clone soldiers advancing across open terrain toward prepared defensive positions held by endless waves of battle droids. For every droid destroyed, 5 clones fell. For every strategic objective taken, dozens of clone lives were spent like currency in a transaction where the clones themselves had no voice in the exchange rate. General Kratos, Clone Commander Neo approached, his armor bearing the scars of a dozen engagements. "Welcome to Megiddo. We're 3 kilometers from the primary droid manufacturing facility. High Command wants it destroyed. Estimates suggest we'll need 3 full battalions to take it. We have 2.5. Kratos surveyed the battlefield. White snow stained with carbon scoring from blaster fire. The twisted wreckage of destroyed droids creating jagged monuments to warfare. In the distance, the manufacturing facility rose like a mechanical fortress, bristling with defensive turrets and anti-aircraft batteries. "Show me the tactical situation," Kratos commanded. As Neo laid out the problem, frontal assault meant certain casualties, flanking routes were mined and heavily fortified. Aerial approach would be suicide against the facility's defensive grid. Something in Kratos' ancient eyes began to glow with that peculiar intensity that clone soldiers were learning to recognize. Not anger, precisely, something closer to clarity. The focus of a warrior who'd spent millennia solving exactly this type of problem through unconventional methods. "Your military doctrine is flawed," Kratos said after a moment. "You calculate losses and call it strategy. You send soldiers to die because your commanders are too limited in imagination to find alternatives." "With respect, sir, alternatives are limited," Commander Neo replied. "The facility is defended. We're infantry with basic equipment. We lack the air support or artillery to soften the position adequately." "Then we do not assault the position," Kratos said. "We become ghosts. We move through places they do not expect us to be." For the next 4 hours, Kratos moved through Megiddo's frozen terrain with a handful of elite clone squads. He mapped patrol routes, identified sensor blind spots, and most crucially, understood that the Separatists' reliance on droid logic meant they followed predictable patterns. Droids didn't anticipate, didn't adapt beyond their programming. A warrior like Kratos, someone who'd fought everything from titans to gods, could exploit that limitation ruthlessly. By nightfall, Kratos and his small team had infiltrated the facility's lower levels without triggering a single alarm. The thermal signatures of his body and the clones were masked by the facility's own heat signatures. The magical aura of the Leviathan axe, which should have registered on any competent force-sensing device, simply didn't, because the Separatists had no framework to understand what they were sensing. It looked like equipment malfunction rather than infiltration. When Kratos reached the facility's main power core, he placed his hand against the ancient machinery and smiled. This was familiar work. Technology was merely another type of enemy, another system to be overcome. "Here," he told the assembled clones. Set your charges along this primary conduit. When I give the signal, detonate them simultaneously. That will destroy the entire facility, a young clone named Cutter realized. All the manufacturing capacity, gone. Yes, Kratos confirmed. That is the point. High Command wants the facility destroyed. We will oblige them, but we will do it with minimal casualties, not maximum. The detonation sequence was timed with precision, as Republic forces launched their frontal assault from outside, tying down droid defenders and pulling their attention outward. The charges within the facility's heart detonated in a cascade sequence that was almost surgical in its efficiency. The manufacturing facility collapsed in on itself, primary systems failing sequentially, droid defenses going dark section by section. The Separatist garrison, suddenly cut off from command and control signals, began to malfunction. Without orders from their commanders, the droids became ineffective. The frontal assault that should have cost 500 clone lives instead cost fewer than 50. By dawn, Mygido's primary Separatist position had been neutralized, and Kratos had earned something unprecedented: the recognition of clone soldiers as something beyond mere strategic assets. General Stas Ali arrived to inspect the captured facility, her lightsaber still humming with residual energy from the battle. She found Kratos overseeing the processing of droid prisoners and the organization of salvageable technology. "The military is calling you a tactical genius," Ali said, approaching the Ghost of Sparta. "Your method saved hundreds of lives and accomplished the mission with minimal losses. High Command wants to deploy you to 6 more critical theaters." "I am not interested in being High Command's tool," Kratos replied, without looking up from his work. "I came to this galaxy to understand it, not to expand military empires." "Yet you're saving clone lives," Ali observed. "Which is what you wanted, isn't it? To prove they were more than expendable soldiers." Kratos finally turned to face the Jedi general, and there was something almost sad in his expression. "I save lives when I can, but this war, your war, is fundamentally unjust. One faction bred for slavery fights another faction made of exploited labor. A Sith Lord manipulates both sides for purposes you do not comprehend. And the Jedi, who could speak truth to this madness, instead become generals fighting to win a war that cannot be won justly." "So what would you have us do?" Ali asked, frustration evident in her voice. "Surrender? Let the Separatists triumph?" "I would have you recognize the truth," Kratos said. "That this war is not what you believe it is. That forces far more ancient and terrible than military strategy are moving behind the scenes, and that your clones, the very soldiers you command, are becoming aware that their existence should not be defined by obedience to authority." General Ali's expression hardened. "That sounds like sedition." "Truth often does to those invested in deception," Kratos replied calmly. Word of Kratos' tactical success spread through Republic military circles faster than communications protocols could contain. The Ghost of Sparta, the being who existed beyond the Force yet fought with godly skill, became a symbol, not just of military effectiveness, but of an alternative to the endless attrition warfare that had defined the Clone Wars. It also drew attention from exactly the quarter Kratos had begun to anticipate. Count Dooku received the intelligence reports with the interest of a predator observing a new species. A being that couldn't be sensed through the Force, yet possessed power levels equivalent to a Jedi Master. A warrior with no ambitions for political power, only for something Dooku found almost incomprehensible: justice. And most intriguingly, this being was demonstrating genuine concern for clone welfare, treating them as individuals rather than tools. The Sith Lord saw opportunity. "Prepare a delegation," Dooku commanded his aide. "We will attempt contact with this Kratos, not through military channels, through direct negotiation. I wish to understand what motivates someone so utterly divorced from conventional ambition. 3 weeks later, after orchestrating a false flag attack that isolated Kratos and a small contingent of clones on the ice world of Murkana, Dooku's representative arrived in a sleek, separatist shuttle. Not droid soldiers, not military escort, simply a representative with authority to negotiate. The clone commander, Cody, wanted to refuse the meeting. But Kratos, with his millennial experience in warfare and politics, understood that sometimes you learned more from enemies willing to talk than from those content to fight silently. They met in a neutral zone, a habitation module buried in Murkana's ice, far from any military installations. The representative was a tall Nemoidian, dressed in fine robes, his name given as Viceroy Gunray. Behind him stood 2 bodyguards, their posture indicating they were actual combatants, not protocol droids. "Kratos," Gunray said smoothly, his reptilian features arranged in an approximation of friendliness. "Count Dooku speaks of you with great interest. He would know. What does the ghost of Sparta want from this war? What goal drives you?" "Freedom," Kratos replied simply. "For the enslaved, for the clones, for all beings forced into servitude by those claiming authority they do not possess." Gunray's expression flickered. Genuine confusion, genuine interest. "Freedom is a luxury. It is achieved by those with power after they've secured their position. You cannot grant freedom to millions through individual acts of compassion." "No," Kratos agreed. "But consciousness can be granted. Awareness can be spread. The seeds of rebellion can be planted. And when the moment comes, when the system reveals its injustice too clearly to be denied, those seeds will grow into something neither the Republic nor the Separatists can contain." "You speak as though you intend to outlive this war," Gunray observed. "As though you've already accepted that both sides will fail to achieve their stated objectives." "I speak as someone who has seen civilizations rise and fall across ages," Kratos said. "The Republic will not endure. The Separatists will not triumph. And in the ashes, new systems will emerge, hopefully better than what came before, but not without struggle." Gunray stood and walked to the module's viewport, looking out across Murkana's endless white landscape. "Count Dooku respects strength and principle. He would make you an offer. Abandon the Republic. Join the Separatist cause. Your tactical genius, combined with our military might, would allow us to end this war on favorable terms. Imagine a new order, free from the Republic's corruption, where exceptional beings like yourself hold positions of genuine authority." "You offer me chains of a different color," Kratos said flatly. "The Separatist alliance is controlled by Dooku, who is himself controlled by a Sith Lord I have not yet met, but whose presence I sense through the Force that permeates this galaxy. I will not serve one master by trading another." "Then you refuse?" "I refuse," Kratos confirmed. "But I do so with respect. You came to negotiate rather than to attack. That suggests Dooku values discourse over violence, at least in this instance. Such things are rare among those who seek power." Gunray smiled, a genuine smile, not diplomatic theater. "Dooku predicted you would refuse. He also predicted you would respect the approach. That is why I came bearing not only negotiation, but information." The Nemoidian retrieved a small data chip. "This contains evidence of Sith involvement in this war's initiation, proof that both the Republic and Separatists are being manipulated toward specific ends. Dooku offers this not to recruit you, but because he believes you should understand what game is being played around you." Kratos took the chip, his ancient eyes studying it with the intensity of someone who'd been deceived by gods and learned the cost of ignorance. "Why would Dooku betray his own master's secrets?" Kratos asked. "Because," Gunray said, "Count Dooku is no longer certain that serving the Sith serves his interests. And a being like you, impossible to predict, beyond force influence, devoted to freedom rather than power. Such a being might prove to be a useful variable in calculus, far more complex than either of us fully understands. Kratos watched as the Nemoidian and his guards returned to their shuttle and departed. He held the data chip in his massive hand, understanding that he'd just been offered a choice of the most profound kind: accept information that would inevitably complicate his understanding of the war, or remain content in ignorance. The choice was not difficult. That evening, with Commander Cody and a small group of trusted clones, Kratos reviewed the contents of Gunray's chip. What he discovered confirmed his worst suspicions and revealed depths of manipulation that even his centuries of experience with divine scheming had not fully anticipated. A Sith Lord, orchestrating both sides, using the Clone Wars as a tool to achieve something vast and terrible, and positioned perfectly to achieve Order 66, the systematic extinction of the Jedi through the very soldiers they commanded. Kratos looked at Cody, seeing in the clone's face the dawning realization of what he and his brothers were being groomed to become. Not soldiers, not even slaves, but executioners. "We need to warn the Jedi," Cody said quietly. "They need to know what's coming." "They will not believe us," Kratos replied. "This manipulation runs too deep. Trust has been poisoned, but we can prepare. We can work from within the system to limit the damage when the moment comes." He stood and walked to the viewport, staring out across Mercana's frozen landscape, his mind processing the complex game being played across the galaxy. "The real war," Kratos said slowly, "has not yet begun. Everything until now has been prelude. And I have the sense that when the true conflict emerges, the fate of this galaxy will depend on choices made by beings like you and me, clones and warriors, those deemed expendable by those who hold conventional power." "What do we do?" Cody asked. Kratos turned back to face the clone commander, and his pale eyes burned with the intensity of eternal fire. "We survive," he said simply. The news reached Anakin Skywalker through encrypted channels, fragments of intelligence suggesting Kratos had made contact with separatist leadership and received classified information regarding Sith involvement in the war. The Chosen One's first reaction was disbelief, followed by something closer to jealousy. Here was a being, a warrior outside the Force's perception, who'd earned respect across both military factions, who commanded the loyalty of clone soldiers, who had access to intelligence that even the Jedi Council struggled to obtain. And Kratos seemed utterly uninterested in the political games that consumed those around him. Anakin's frustration with the Jedi Order had been growing for years. The Council's restrictions on his power, their refusal to grant him the rank of Master, their insistence that the Force was about balance rather than strength, all of it chafed against his fundamental nature. He craved power, craved recognition, craved the means to prevent the losses he'd suffered and the suffering he feared to come. Kratos represented something Anakin envied: complete autonomy. A being bound to no order, accountable to no council, free to pursue his objectives unencumbered by bureaucratic restraint. When the Council assigned Anakin to personally meet with Kratos on the neutral ground of a Republic supply station orbiting Kalar, the Chosen One arrived with mixed motivations. Part of him came to understand why Kratos had contacted the Separatists. Part of him came hoping to recruit the Ghost of Sparta to his vision of what the Jedi could become under different leadership. And part of him came with the unconscious agenda that drove so much of his behavior, to prove himself superior to this mysterious warrior. Kratos was meditating when Anakin arrived, sitting in a recreation chamber overlooking the supply station's thermal vents, his massive frame perfectly still, his Leviathan axe and blades of chaos arranged before him with ritual precision. The clone guards stationed outside the chamber had been instructed not to interfere with either party, which meant Anakin entered unannounced. "The Chosen One," Kratos said without opening his eyes. "I have been expecting you. Your presence in the Force announces itself long before your body arrives anywhere." "You're different," Anakin replied, taking a seat across from the ghost of Sparta. "Most beings would be suspicious of a Jedi entering their private space. You seem unsurprised. I have fought gods, demons, and titans across ages," Kratos said, finally opening his eyes. "Suspicion without knowledge is the tool of the fearful. You are powerful, young Skywalker, but you are not a threat I cannot meet." He paused. "Though you harbor thoughts of proving yourself against me, that much is obvious." Anakin tensed slightly. "The Council says you contacted the Separatists, that you're leaking military intelligence to both sides." "I contacted them to understand them," Kratos corrected. "And I accepted information they offered, because knowledge serves all beings, not merely one faction. The truth about Sith manipulation in this war is not classified. It is simply ignored by those who profit from the conflict. You're suggesting the Jedi are complicit in—" "I am suggesting," Kratos interrupted, "that the Jedi have become tools of a system they do not fully comprehend. You are generals in a war orchestrated by forces more ancient and powerful than your order. And your soldiers, the clones, are being prepared for a purpose you have not anticipated." Anakin leaned forward, his intensity manifesting as a force aura that made the temperature in the chamber drop perceptibly. "What purpose?" Kratos retrieved the data chip Gunray had given him and placed it on the table between them. "This contains proof. The Sith have programmed the clones with a protocol, Order 66. When activated, it will compel the clone soldiers to execute their Jedi commanders. The war, all of it, has been designed to position the Jedi for systematic extinction." The color drained from Anakin's face. The implications were staggering. Every clone soldier serving alongside Jedi, every one of them a potential assassin, waiting for a signal embedded in their genetics and psychology since their creation on Kamino. "The Council must be told," Anakin said, already moving toward the communication terminal. "The Council will not believe you," Kratos said flatly. "Nor will they believe me. This truth is too vast, too terrible, to be accepted without proof they will not find convincing. What I can tell you is this: the moment is approaching. Within months, perhaps less, the final phase will begin. And when it does, the Jedi will fall, the Republic will transform into an empire, and the galaxy will be remade in the image of whoever possesses the power to enforce their vision." Anakin turned back to face the ghost of Sparta, and his expression had shifted, no longer competitive or dismissive, but genuinely afraid. "What do we do?" "We prepare," Kratos said, "and we ensure that when the moment comes, those who value freedom are ready to resist." Over the following weeks, an unusual alliance formed, not officially, not through any council directive, but through encrypted communications and careful coordination. Anakin began working with Kratos, using his position within the Jedi Order to gather corroborating evidence of Sith infiltration. Meanwhile, Kratos coordinated with Clone Commander Cody and other clone officers who'd been awakened to consciousness on Kamino, ensuring that at least some clone units understood their true situation. The Jedi Council remained largely unaware of these activities, though Obi-Wan suspected something was occurring. He confronted Anakin directly one evening in the temple's lower archives. "You've been communicating with Kratos," Obi-Wan said. It wasn't a question. "He has information the Council needs," Anakin replied, not bothering to deny it. "The Council has already determined that Kratos is a complicating variable," Obi-Wan said carefully. "His influence over the clone soldiers is concerning. Some members believe he should be removed from active duty before his presence destabilizes the entire military structure." "Then the Council is making a mistake," Anakin said. Kratos is trying to help us understand what's really happening in this war. Obi-Wan studied his former Padawan carefully. What exactly do you believe is happening, Anakin? For a moment, Anakin considered telling Obi-Wan everything. The Sith conspiracy, the clone protocols, the coming extinction of the Jedi. But something in him hesitated. Obi-Wan was bound by his loyalty to the Council, to the Order's established hierarchy. Telling him would mean watching as bureaucratic procedure and political caution prevented action. "I believe we're losing," Anakin said finally. "And I believe Kratos understands how to fight in ways the Jedi have forgotten." Obi-Wan's expression grew sad. "Anakin, the Jedi have always understood how to fight. What we struggle with is how to do so morally. Kratos' methods are effective, but they lack restraint. He has killed thousands, clones, droids, separatists, without hesitation or remorse." "He's killed to protect freedom," Anakin replied. "Isn't that what the Jedi claim to do?" "There is a difference between protection and execution," Obi-Wan said quietly. "A difference I fear you're beginning to lose sight of." Elsewhere in the galaxy, on Coruscant in the depths of the Senate building, Chancellor Palpatine reviewed intelligence reports with the satisfaction of an artist observing his masterpiece nearing completion. The Clone Wars had played out almost exactly as predicted. The Jedi had been positioned perfectly as both protectors and potential scapegoats. The clone soldiers were primed, their inhibitor chips fully programmed and ready for activation. The only true variable, the only element that had somewhat disrupted his calculations, was Kratos. Palpatine's force sensitivity was profound, his understanding of galactic politics and personal ambition exquisite. But Kratos operated outside these frameworks. He couldn't be sensed through force manipulation. He couldn't be blackmailed through appeals to power or recognition. He couldn't be seduced by position or authority. Yet paradoxically, Kratos was becoming less of a threat than Palpatine's initial assessment suggested. The ghost of Sparta's concern for individual freedom, his resistance to centralized power, his unwillingness to participate in galactic governance, all of these were liabilities in the Emperor's new order. When Order 66 was activated, when the Jedi fell and the Empire rose, Kratos would be an isolated warrior on a transformed galactic stage. He could be managed, hunted if necessary. Or, if sufficiently provoked, he could be allowed to become a symbol of resistance, a controlled outlet for rebellion that would never threaten the fundamental structure of Imperial rule. The moment arrived on Utapau, a world of sinkholes and vast caverns where General Grievous had been cornered by Obi-Wan and the clone forces. Kratos was not present at the engagement. He was on Megiddo, overseeing repairs to clone facilities that had been damaged by separatist counterattacks. Commander Cody was with the Utapau forces, following standard protocol, fighting alongside Obi-Wan. And then came the signal. Order 66. Cody, who'd spent weeks awakening to consciousness through Kratos' influence, who'd come to understand himself as an individual rather than a tool, felt something activate deep in his neural pathways. Not mind control, something more subtle and terrible. An inexorable compulsion, a directive written into his very biology. The sequence of clone soldiers who executed their Jedi commanders on Utapau were not acting from free will. They were slaves to protocols written into their genetics, and the tragedy was that Cody, having experienced a taste of freedom through Kratos, felt every moment of his compliance as a violation. Obi-Wan died without understanding why his own soldiers had turned against him. His last moment was confusion, not betrayal. The Jedi General had been too caught up in the immediate battle to recognize the greater catastrophe unfolding across the galaxy. When Kratos received the first reports of Order 66, he was meditating once again. But this time, his meditation was broken by a realization that felt like a lightsaber through his heart. He had failed. Despite everything, despite awakening clone consciousness, despite warning Anakin, despite attempting to prepare for this moment, he had failed. The machinery of the Sith had proven too powerful, too thoroughly embedded in the very system he'd tried to change. Commander Cody arrived at his location within the hour, his armor scorched and damaged, his expression broken in ways that went far deeper than physical wounds. "We executed them," Cody said, his voice hollow. "All of them. We killed the Jedi we'd fought beside, trusted, followed, and we couldn't stop ourselves. It was like our bodies belonged to someone else." Kratos placed a hand on the clone's shoulder. "You were slaves. You were designed for this. The fault lies not with you, but with those who created you without freedom." "What do we do now?" Cody asked desperately. "The Republic is gone. There's an empire now, and we're still soldiers. We're still tools." Kratos stood and walked to the viewport, looking out across Mygeeto's scarred landscape. Across the galaxy, the Jedi were being hunted. The Republic had transformed into an empire. Anakin Skywalker had fallen to the dark side and become something worse than a Sith Lord. A Sith Lord serving another's vision rather than his own. And Kratos, warrior god, freedom fighter, the being who'd invaded this galaxy seeking peace, understood that the war was far from over. It had simply transformed into something more terrible than anyone had anticipated. "Now," Kratos said slowly, turning back to face Commander Cody and the scattered clone forces gathering around him, "we become what the Empire does not expect, a resistance, not military, not organized through conventional hierarchy, but a network of awakened individuals who understand that their consciousness, their individual will, is the most valuable asset they possess." He retrieved his Leviathan axe and blades of chaos, the weapons seeming to glow with renewed purpose in the chamber's light. The Jedi believed in balance through the Force. The Empire believes in order through control. I believe in freedom through choice. His pale eyes burned with ancient determination. The Empire's rise was swift and absolute. Within weeks of Order 66, clone forces had been integrated into Imperial military structure, Jedi temples had been defaced or destroyed, and a new order, one built on fear, absolute authority, and technological supremacy, had been established across the galaxy. Palpatine, now Emperor, moved with the satisfaction of a long game finally reaching its conclusion. The Jedi Order was virtually extinct. The Republic had been transformed into the Galactic Empire. And most crucially, the clones, now designated as stormtroopers, their designation stripped of its connection to their origins, had proven their utility as both enforcers and disposable assets. What the Emperor had not anticipated was that consciousness, once awakened, could not be fully suppressed. Clone units that had been exposed to Kratos' teaching began demonstrating subtle forms of resistance. Not outright mutiny that would be detectable and removable. Instead, hesitation before executing orders, reluctance to fire on civilian populations, and most dangerously, communication networks that linked awakened clones across multiple star systems. Commander Cody became the nexus of this hidden rebellion. Through encrypted channels and careful coordination, he worked with Kratos to build a structure of resistance that mimicked the Empire's own hierarchical organization while remaining fundamentally invisible to Imperial oversight. "They're calling it the Clone Collective," Cody reported during one of their encrypted communications, broadcast from deep within a separatist-controlled sector. Not an army, not a formal organization, but a network of clones who remember that they're more than their programming. Kratos listened from a hidden facility on an ice moon orbiting the Outer Rim, his massive frame illuminated by the glow of communication terminals salvaged from destroyed Republic installations. Around him moved a dozen clone deserters, along with a handful of Force-sensitive refugees who'd survived Order 66's purge. Among them was Padawan Caleb Doom, a young Jedi survivor who'd escaped the Temple purges through sheer luck and quick reflexes. "The Empire will eventually detect this network," Kratos said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries spent opposing organized tyranny. "When they do, they will move to eliminate it. We must be prepared for that moment." "How?" Caleb asked, his youth making him both idealistic and frustrated by Kratos' measured approach. "The Jedi are gone. We're scattered, powerless, and the clones are slaves to their programming. Even if they want to resist, their own neurobiology compels them." "Not entirely," Kratos replied, and he'd been working on this problem since Order 66's activation. "The inhibitor chips are programming, yes, but programming can be disrupted, rewritten, or circumvented through sufficient biological, neurological stress. The clones who trained with me, who experienced consciousness before the protocol was activated, they've developed partial immunity. Their sense of individual will creates dissonance with the compulsion. It makes them unreliable servants to the Empire." Cody's voice crackled back through the communication. "We're already seeing it. Clone units with high Kratos contact ratios are reporting malfunction rates triple the galactic average. The Empire is investigating. They think it's a defect in the cloning process itself." "They will eventually understand the truth," Kratos said. "And when they do, we will be ready. For now, continue building the network, quietly, carefully, and teach every awakened clone that their consciousness is not a defect, it is liberation." On Coruscant, in the depths of the Imperial Palace, Emperor Palpatine studied reports of clone reliability issues with a mixture of amusement and calculation. The problems were manageable, nothing that Imperial efficiency couldn't solve through replacement programs and enhanced supervision. But they pointed to something more interesting: the continued influence of this Kratos entity. The Emperor had allowed the Ghost of Sparta to remain alive after Order 66 partially, because eliminating him would require resources the Empire was deploying elsewhere, partially because Kratos' continued survival allowed him to serve as a useful focus for any latent rebellion sentiment. Better to have scattered resistors rallying around a known quantity than to drive them into unpredictable organizations. But if Kratos was beginning to create measurable problems in military efficiency, that calculation might need to adjust. Palpatine summoned his new right hand, Darth Vader, the fallen Anakin Skywalker, now bound to the Emperor through both the Force and through technological life support that made him permanently dependent on Imperial apparatus. The Dark Lord of the Sith arrived in his meditation chamber, his breathing like distant thunder, his presence in the Force radiating controlled fury. "There is a situation," the Emperor explained, gesturing towards the holographic displays showing clone malfunction statistics. "The warrior Kratos continues to inspire resistance among clone elements. His influence spreads despite our efforts at suppression. I believe the time has come to eliminate this variable permanently." Vader studied the data displays, his photoreceptors processing tactical information with inhuman precision. Kratos defeated General Grievous, destroyed multiple separatist command structures. His combat capability approaches that of a trained Force user. "Which is precisely why you will be suitable for this task," Palpatine replied smoothly. "Your mastery of the Force, combined with your combat training and your machine enhancements, will prove sufficient against this ancient warrior. Additionally, confronting Kratos may provide valuable intelligence regarding his origins and capabilities." Vader tilted his helmeted head slightly, a gesture that served in place of traditional nods. Where is he located? Unknown, the Emperor admitted, which was itself concerning. His network deliberately obscures its locations, but we can accelerate his exposure by increasing pressure on clone units we suspect of harboring resistance sympathies. He will eventually respond. Kratos felt the shift in Imperial activity through subtle channels, increased surveillance on known clone gathering points, enhanced security protocols around military installations, and most tellingly, the arrival of new Inquisitors throughout the Outer Rim. The Empire was tightening its grip, and behind it all, Kratos sensed something that made even his ancient warrior's instinct register caution. Another being moving through the Force with terrible purpose, a presence so dominated by darkness and rage that it seemed to consume the light around it. Kratos had never encountered this being directly, but he'd heard clones whisper about it, a Dark Lord who'd once been Anakin Skywalker. The Chosen One had fallen. The knowledge struck Kratos harder than anticipated. He'd held out hope that Anakin, young, powerful, full of potential, might be one of the few who could resist Palpatine's manipulation. Instead, the Chosen One had become the instrument of the Jedi's extinction. It was a failure more profound than Order 66 itself. "We need to move," Cody advised during their next communication. "Imperial forces are beginning systematic sweeps through our known network. They're using something new, Force-sensitive Inquisitors who can detect Force signatures and use them to track us. Standard clones can hide, but anyone with Force sensitivity is vulnerable. Then we separate," Kratos decided. The Force-sensitive survivors will establish their own network, disconnected from clone operations. The clones will continue building the resistance within Imperial military structure, and I will move to confront what is coming. Kratos. Caleb Doom started to protest, but the ghost of Sparta cut him off with a gesture. "I have existed for millennia by recognizing when a battle must be met head-on rather than avoided," Kratos said. "There is a darkness pursuing this network, a being of tremendous power who will not be satisfied with hunting scattered clones. That being will eventually come seeking me. When it does, I will meet it where I choose, on ground of my selection, rather than allowing it to dictate terms." The confrontation came on Eriadu, a mid-rim world that had been conquered by the Empire and transformed into a military research facility. Kratos allowed himself to be tracked there deliberately, knowing that the trap was obvious, yet accepting it as the price of forcing the engagement on his terms. Darth Vader arrived with a contingent of Imperial stormtroopers, his massive frame encased in armor that itself seemed to radiate authority and power. The Dark Lord's first act was to crush the stormtroopers' commander with a casual gesture of force manipulation, demonstrating hierarchy, demonstrating that even Imperial military leaders served at his pleasure. Then he faced Kratos in the facility's vast training chamber. "Ghost of Sparta," Vader's voice emerged from his respirator like an announcement of doom. "The Emperor offers you a choice. Submit to Imperial authority, and you will be permitted to continue your work, teaching discipline to the clone forces. Refuse, and you will be destroyed." Kratos stood motionless, his blades of chaos resting at his sides, his Leviathan axe held loosely in one massive hand. "I do not negotiate with those who serve tyranny, and you, Anakin Skywalker, have become tyranny's greatest instrument." Something flickered across Vader's helmeted face, a response that might have been anger or might have been something more complex. "That name is dead. I am Darth Vader, and you would be wise to fear me." "Fear is a tool used by those insecure in their power," Kratos replied. "You wear armor because your body was broken. You use the Force like a blade because you lack the discipline to use it with wisdom. And you serve an emperor because you have not yet faced the terror of true freedom." Vader raised his hand, and Force energy erupted from him like a wave. The dark side of the Force, unleashed with the fury of a being driven by rage and despair. The energy slammed into Kratos with the force of a planetary collision. The ghost of Sparta was thrown backward, his body skidding across the training chamber's floor, leaving scorched marks in the polished metal. But he rose immediately, unbroken, unhurt in any meaningful way. "Your power is vast," Kratos acknowledged, approaching with measured steps. "But power without purpose is merely destruction, and destruction, I have learned, is easiest to overcome." They met in combat that transcended mere physical warfare. Vader's lightsaber, a weapon of plasma and kyber crystal, met Kratos' blades of chaos in a collision that sent sparks and energy cascading across the chamber. The Dark Lord moved with mechanical precision, each strike calculated, each movement serving tactical purpose. But Kratos fought with something more primal, the instinctive combat genius of a being who'd fought titans and gods across ages. When Vader attempted to use force manipulation to crush Kratos' ribs or suffocate his lungs, the ghost of Sparta simply accepted the attack and continued fighting through it. The Dark Lord tried to sense Kratos' intentions through the Force and found nothing, a void where consciousness should have been, a being operating outside the Force's perceptions entirely. It was, Kratos realized, not unlike the feeling Jedi described as facing someone with no midi-chlorians. Except Kratos' absence from the Force was absolute. The duel raged for nearly an hour, neither combatant able to decisively overcome the other. Vader's armor and technology proved resilient against the blades of chaos. Kratos' godly durability and combat skill proved insufficient to permanently injure the Dark Lord, while he remained protected by force barriers and mechanical enhancement. Finally, through sheer willpower and centuries of fighting experience, Kratos forced a stalemate. He stood before Vader, bleeding from multiple wounds where lightsaber strikes had found purchase, his breathing heavy but controlled. Vader, for his part, showed no outward signs of injury. The armor and artificial body concealed damage, but his movements had slowed slightly. "You are formidable," Vader acknowledged, his voice carrying something that might have been respect. "The Emperor did not overestimate your capabilities." "And you are bound," Kratos replied. "Bound to that armor, bound to that Emperor, bound to rage and despair. You could have been so much more, young Skywalker. Freedom was within your reach, and you chose slavery instead." Something in Vader's stance shifted, a moment of genuine uncertainty, of the being beneath the armor recognizing truth. But it passed quickly, suppressed by programming and commitment to the dark side. "I choose power over freedom," Vader said finally. "And I choose this mission above mercy. When I report to the Emperor, I will inform him that you are not worth the resources required to eliminate you. Your network of clones poses minimal threat to Imperial stability. Better to allow you to continue your work, growing more confident in your resistance, so that when we choose to move against you, all elements can be eliminated simultaneously." He deactivated his lightsaber and turned toward the exit. "Live, Kratos, for now. It amuses the Emperor to permit it. But know that your days in this galaxy are numbered." Kratos watched the Dark Lord leave, understanding that he'd achieved something valuable. A temporary reprieve, a recognition of his resistance's limited threat level, and most importantly, a confirmation that somewhere within Darth Vader still existed Anakin Skywalker, capable of mercy, capable of restraint, capable of considering alternatives to absolute destruction. It was a fragile thread, but it was something. In the hours that followed, as Kratos' wounds began to heal through his accelerated recovery, he understood that the war had fundamentally transformed. This was no longer a conflict between Republic and Separatists, or even between Jedi and Sith. This was a deeper struggle, the clash between centralized tyranny and individual consciousness, 5 years passed under Imperial rule. The Clone Wars became history, rewritten, sanitized, transformed into a narrative of noble soldiers defending the Republic against treacherous separatists. The truth that the entire conflict had been orchestrated by Palpatine to eliminate the Jedi and consolidate power remained buried in classified archives accessible only to the highest Imperial officials. The clones themselves were gradually phased out of active military service. As their accelerated lifespans reached their natural conclusion, stormtroopers recruited from Imperial worlds replaced them. The clone soldiers who survived were either integrated into specialized units or left to fade into obscurity, their purpose served, their utility exhausted. But within that obscurity, Kratos' network of awakened clones grew. It wasn't a formal rebellion. The Empire would have crushed anything openly organized with overwhelming force. Instead, it was a distributed consciousness, a network of individuals spread across Imperial military installations who maintained communication through encrypted channels and dead drops. They didn't actively sabotage Imperial operations, but they quietly protected each other, ensured that clones with force sensitivity or dangerous levels of consciousness were relocated to safer assignments. And most importantly, they remembered. They remembered that they were more than their programming. They remembered that consciousness was possible. They remembered Kratos and his teaching that freedom existed as an active choice, not a distant concept. Commander Cody had become the nexus of this network, no longer a military officer, but a legend whispered about in clone barracks across the galaxy. He'd survived 5 years of Imperial service through careful anonymity and strategic placement, his consciousness having developed sufficient autonomy to override the worst aspects of his inhibitor chip, while still appearing compliant enough to avoid scrutiny. Kratos himself had become something between myth and ghost. Sightings were reported from a dozen different sectors simultaneously, making his actual location impossible to determine. The ghost of Sparta had learned to exist in the margins of Imperial society, moving through industrial worlds where clones still worked in maintenance capacities, through Outer Rim installations, through the growing network of refugee settlements where force-sensitive survivors of Order 66 had found sanctuary. He'd also begun training a new generation of Force users, not Jedi, not bound by the Order's philosophical constraints, but individuals awakened to the Force's possibilities through direct experience rather than institutional training. Caleb Doom, the young Jedi survivor, had become one of his most accomplished students, learning to channel the Force. Through combat and will, rather than the structured techniques the Temple had taught him. The Empire is becoming unstable, Caleb reported during one of their training sessions on an abandoned space station orbiting a dead moon. The young Jedi, no longer young, now weathered by 5 years of survival and resistance, moved through combat forms with Kratos, their lightsaber and axe creating a rhythm of clash and energy. We're receiving reports from multiple sectors. There's unrest in the Outer Rim. Some systems are questioning Imperial authority, and there's rumors of an organization forming, something that calls itself the Rebel Alliance. Kratos caught Caleb's lightsaber strike with his Leviathan axe, the impact creating a shower of sparks. The Empire contains the seeds of its own destruction through the very mechanisms it uses to maintain control. When power is concentrated utterly, any disruption to the center threatens the entire structure. Palpatine believed he could maintain absolute control indefinitely. He was mistaken. The Rebel Alliance, do you think they can succeed? Caleb asked, pressing the attack, pushing Kratos through an extended sequence. I think, Kratos replied, matching the young Jedi's intensity with casual ease despite the increasing complexity of the exchanges. That they represent something the Empire cannot fully suppress, hope. And hope, I have learned, is more powerful than any military force or technological advantage. He disarmed Caleb with a precise strike that sent the lightsaber flying, then immediately caught the young man's follow-up unarmed strike and set him gently on the ground in a position of rest. You have progressed well. Your connection to the Force deepens, but you still carry the Jedi's greatest weakness. What's that? Caleb asked, breathing hard. Fear, Kratos said simply. Fear of the dark side, fear of your own power, fear of making the hard choices that true freedom requires. The Jedi taught you that power corrupts, that strength leads to darkness. I teach you that power is neutral. What matters is the will directing it and the purpose it serves. Elsewhere in the galaxy, in the throne room of the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine contemplated intelligence reports with the satisfaction of a game approaching its endgame. The Rebel Alliance was growing, exactly as predicted. The hidden resistance networks were becoming more active, all according to design. The Emperor's grand strategy had never been to eliminate all resistance. Perfection was boring, ultimately self-defeating. Instead, he'd engineered a system where controlled resistance would serve as an outlet for dissent, a way to identify and eliminate troublemakers without having to crush the entire population into unconsciousness. The Rebel Alliance would grow, would attempt dramatic operations, would be defeated in spectacular fashion, reinforcing the futility of resistance. It was elegant. It was sustainable. It would maintain the Empire for generations. But there remained one variable that Palpatine could not fully predict or control: Kratos. The Ghost of Sparta had proven surprisingly difficult to eliminate. Darth Vader had reported that direct confrontation was possible, but resource-intensive. The Inquisitors had proven ineffective against someone who existed outside Force perception. And allowing Kratos to live and continue building his clone network was beginning to create measurable problems in Imperial military reliability. Palpatine made a decision. "Bring me Lord Vader," he commanded his attendants, "and prepare my fleet. It is time to deal with the Kratos problem directly." The signal came through encrypted channels that had been carefully protected for 5 years. All Clone Collective operatives were to converge on the ice moon of Tosk Prime within 72 hours. It was unprecedented. It was dangerous. It was also unmistakably Kratos' communication pattern. Cody arrived with a contingent of clone operatives, all of them carrying the weight of 5 years' survival, and the understanding that this gathering represented either a turning point or the beginning of the end. Kratos was already there, along with Caleb and a dozen other Force-sensitive survivors. The Ghost of Sparta stood at the viewport of the facility, overlooking Tosk Prime's frozen landscape. His expression grave in ways that his soldiers had learned to recognize as portending major action. "The Empire moves against us," Kratos announced without preamble. "Emperor Palpatine has decided that our existence poses sufficient threat to warrant direct intervention. A task force is being assembled, Star Destroyers, Inquisitors, and Darth Vader himself. They will arrive within days." "What's the plan?" Cody asked, his commander's training already running tactical scenarios. "We can disperse, scatter across the Outer Rim, rebuild elsewhere. We've done it before." "Running is no longer sufficient," Kratos replied. "We have spent 5 years awakening consciousness in clone soldiers, building a network of resistance, demonstrating that alternatives to absolute obedience exist. If we run now, if we scatter without resistance, the Empire will hunt us individually and extinguish us piecemeal. The network will collapse." "You're suggesting we fight?" Caleb said, and there was genuine concern in his voice. "Against Star Destroyers and the entire Imperial military apparatus will be annihilated." "Probably," Kratos agreed with the brutal honesty that came from millennia of warfare. But there are forms of victory beyond military success. If we stand and fight, if we demonstrate that even against overwhelming odds, resistance is possible, then we give hope to everyone watching across the galaxy. We show that the Empire is not invincible. We prove that Palpatine's control is not absolute. Cody understood immediately. You want to use this as a symbol. Turn our destruction into a statement. I want to turn our stand into a transformation, Kratos corrected. The clone collective exists in shadow because secrecy served our survival. But the Empire already knows we exist. They're already hunting us. The question is, do we face that hunting as scattered individuals, or do we face it as something larger, a resistance that declares itself to the galaxy? Linking with the Rebel Alliance, Caleb asked. If they will have us, Kratos replied. The clones are warriors. We can offer them military capability they desperately need. In exchange, they can offer us legitimacy, the recognition that we represent not merely personal resistance, but organized opposition to tyranny. Over the next 48 hours, encrypted communications reached out to Rebel Alliance contacts in the Outer Rim. The response was cautious, but interested, a military force of trained soldiers, led by a being of legendary capability, was not something the Alliance could easily dismiss. A meeting was arranged on a neutral station. What emerged from that meeting was a formal alliance, the Clone Collective, bearing the designation Clone Force 99, at Kratos' insistence, a reference to the uniqueness of their consciousness, would become a special operations unit within the Rebel Alliance, operating with significant autonomy in exchange for their combat expertise and intelligence gathered from within the Empire's own ranks. The Imperial Task Force arrived at Tosk Prime to find not a scattered resistance network, but a prepared defensive position. Kratos had positioned Clone Force 99's operatives strategically throughout the facility and across the moon's terrain. They'd salvaged old Clone Wars-era weapons and had been bolstered by Rebel Alliance military support, X-Wing squadrons, ground troops, and most importantly, legitimate military organization and command structure. When the Star Destroyers began their orbital bombardment, the clones didn't flee. They held their positions. When the first wave of stormtroopers descended, they met organized resistance, not panicked civilians. The battle lasted 3 days. It was brutal, costly, and ultimately, from a military standpoint, a defeat for the resistance forces. The Empire's superior firepower and armor proved decisive. The Clone Force 99 and their Rebel Alliance allies were gradually pushed back, suffering casualties that mounted with each engagement. But something unexpected happened. Clone soldiers fighting alongside their awakened brothers began questioning their orders. Some refused to fire on the resistance. Others deliberately missed targets. A few even defected during the battle, removing their armor and joining Clone Force 99's ranks. The Imperial forces didn't collapse, but they became less efficient, less coordinated, less certain in their application of overwhelming force. And Darth Vader, arriving late to the engagement as the battle turned toward Imperial victory, found himself facing Kratos once more. The second duel between the Ghost of Sparta and the Dark Lord was shorter, but more intense than their first meeting. Kratos was exhausted from 3 days of continuous combat. Vader was fresher, more focused, driven by Palpatine's explicit commands to eliminate the resistance leader. Yet somewhere within Vader, doubt had grown over 5 years. Doubt about the Emperor's vision, doubt about his own choices, doubt about whether Anakin Skywalker had truly been destroyed or merely dormant. When Kratos pressed the advantage, when the Ghost of Sparta drove Vader backward across the facility's collapsing corridors, the Dark Lord made a choice that would echo across the galaxy. He released the fight. Instead of pressing his counterattack, instead of calling in reinforcements, instead of pursuing Kratos into the evacuation shuttles now loading with survivors, Darth Vader stood motionless, and watched as the ghost of Sparta and the leadership of Clone Force 99 escaped into the void of space. When Palpatine's officers asked why he hadn't prevented the escape, Vader simply replied, "The Emperor did not specify that prevention required my direct involvement. Clone Force 99 has been identified, tracked, and documented. They will be found again. There is no escape for those who oppose the Empire." But it was a lie, and Vader, for the first time in 5 years, understood that he was capable of lying to his master. In the escape shuttle hurtling through hyperspace, Kratos stood watching Tosk Prime recede behind them, and he smiled, a rare expression that carried satisfaction not from victory, but from the knowledge that seeds planted years ago were finally beginning to bear fruit. The clone collective had gone public. They were now recognized as part of the organized Rebel Alliance, and most importantly, they demonstrated that the Empire was not invincible. The real war, the war between freedom and tyranny, between consciousness and control, was finally beginning to show itself to the galaxy. The Rebel Alliance's headquarters on Hoth was a fortress carved from ice and desperation. The base represented everything the Empire opposed, a gathering of misfits, defectors, idealists, and soldiers fighting not for conquest, but for the abstract concept of freedom. It was militarily indefensible, politically unstable, and fundamentally morally necessary. Kratos stood in the command center surrounded by holographic displays showing Imperial military positions across the galaxy. Beside him, Clone Commander Cody reviewed casualty reports from Tosk Prime with the grim professionalism of someone who'd lost friends to orders he didn't control. General Kraken, the Rebel Alliance's military commander, watched both of them with the careful evaluation of someone assessing whether integrating a force of conscious clones into his command structure would stabilize or destabilize his already fragile coalition. "Our numbers are still growing," Cody reported. Clone units across 17 different Imperial installations have now openly defected. The collective is up to nearly 8,000 operatives. Most are scattered, but the ones reaching us are fully trained soldiers with knowledge of Imperial protocols and installations. "The Empire will respond with increased clone liquidation protocols," Kratos said, his gaze fixed on the tactical displays. "They will view clone consciousness as a contagion. Any unit showing signs of independent thought will be executed or transferred to suicide missions, which accelerates defections," General Kraken observed. "A clone facing death for thinking independently will choose to rebel, so the Empire's response creates the very thing it's trying to prevent." "The paradox of absolute control," Kratos replied. "Power concentrated utterly can crush individual resistance, but it cannot eliminate the desire for freedom itself. Suppress it too harshly, and you create martyrs. Allow it breathing room, and it grows like wildflowers through cracks in stone." Over the following weeks, Kratos' presence transformed the Rebel Alliance's military operations. His centuries of combat experience, combined with Clone Force 99's detailed knowledge of Imperial military structure and Caleb Doom's growing mastery of Force-enhanced tactics, created a unit that was disproportionately effective against Imperial forces. A strike on an Imperial weapons cache on Ord Mantell resulted in the destruction of a shipment of new Stormtrooper armor configurations before they could be deployed. An infiltration of a clone trooper retraining facility on Centax II liberated 300 clones scheduled for execution and brought them into the Rebel Alliance's ranks. A daring raid on an Imperial communications relay near the Outer Rim allowed the Alliance to intercept and decode a portion of Emperor Palpatine's private communications. But it was that last operation, the interception of Imperial communications, that changed everything. The decoded messages revealed something that sent shockwaves through both the Alliance and, once word leaked to Imperial channels, through the Empire itself. Palpatine was preparing something called Project Starkiller. The nature of the project remained obscured in the communications, but the scale of resources being devoted to it suggested something unprecedented in galactic warfare. A superweapon, General Kraken theorized during a late-night strategy session. The Emperor is building something massive, something capable of turning the war decisively. A space station, Caleb suggested, his force sensitivity allowing him to sense fragments of meaning in the encrypted data. I can feel it through the force, something vast, something artificial, something designed to project power across stellar distances. Kratos listened to these theories with the patient attention of someone who'd heard predictions of world-ending weapons before and learned that reality was often stranger than speculation. But he understood the strategic implications immediately. If the Empire possesses a weapon of sufficient power, he said slowly, the Rebel Alliance will have weeks, perhaps days, before Palpatine uses it to eliminate this base and all organized resistance in the Outer Rim. The time for cautious operations has ended. You're suggesting we go after this Starkiller directly, General Kraken said incredulously. We don't even know where it is. We know its name and its designation, nothing more. We know it requires resources, Kratos replied. Resources concentrated at locations that can be mapped through their supply chains and military movements. We know it represents Palpatine's greatest investment, and we know that destroying it before its completion would represent victory of such magnitude that it would transform the entire war. It would also be a suicide mission, another Alliance commander interjected. Attacking an Imperial superweapon project would require forces we don't possess, technology we don't have, and knowledge of defenses we can't anticipate. Kratos stood and approached the holographic displays, his massive frame casting shadows across the tactical data. 5 years ago, I taught clones that consciousness was possible, that individuals could choose their own path despite programming designed to prevent it. I taught them that freedom had a price, but that price was worth paying because the alternative was slavery. He turned to face the assembled commanders. Now I ask all of you, what price are you willing to pay? If we do nothing, if we wait, we will be destroyed. The Empire will eventually track us here. Palpatiner will eventually complete his superweapon and use it to eliminate everything we've built. Is there not value in facing that enemy directly, on ground we choose, with the understanding that even failure here represents resistance? General Kraken studied Kratos with new respect. The Ghost of Sparta wasn't advocating recklessness. He was advocating for the only real choice available, action in the face of inevitable threat, rather than passivity in the hope that circumstances might change. I'll need intelligence operatives and scout teams, Kratos said. Give me 2 weeks. If we can locate Starkiller's construction site, then we make a decision about direct action. If we cannot, then we at least gather intelligence that might be valuable for future operations. The intelligence gathering phase revealed something that made Kratos' ancient warrior's instinct register genuine caution. Starkiller wasn't a space station. It was a planet, an artificial construction on a scale that dwarfed even the largest starships or orbital platforms. The Empire had taken an entire planetary mass and converted it into a weapon, a superweapon capable of annihilating entire star systems with a single charge. More troubling, Palpatine had obtained the plans for this weapon from somewhere outside the Empire. The architecture suggested knowledge from sources far older than the current galactic conflict. There were echoes of ancient Sith design principles, but mixed with something else, engineering concepts that predated the Sith themselves. He's not building this from innovation, Caleb observed, as he and Kratos reviewed the architectural data in a secure chamber. The Emperor found this knowledge, ancient knowledge, from before the Empire, maybe before the Jedi Order itself. The Force reaches backward and forward through time, Kratos mused. A being sufficiently powerful in dark side knowledge might perceive information from past ages. Palpatine has had centuries to study such mysteries. It is possible he uncovered technological principles long forgotten. That's what concerns me, Caleb replied. If Starkiller is built on principles we don't understand, how do we even begin to damage it? Standard military assault won't be sufficient against a planetary weapon. Kratos was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes fixed on the holographic displays showing Starkiller's massive form. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his weathered face. "We do not assault it militarily," he said. "We assault it as we have learned to assault all systems built on control and obedience. We attack its capacity to function. Every weapon, every military installation, every system of power ultimately depends on individuals making choices about whether to support or sabotage it." "You want to infiltrate it," Caleb realized. "Get operatives inside before it's complete." "I want to ensure," Kratos corrected, "that when the moment comes to destroy Starkiller, we have people positioned within it who understand that their consciousness, their individual will, is more valuable than their service to the Emperor." The infiltration of Starkiller took 6 months. Clone Force 99 operatives, moving through Imperial supply chains and military personnel networks, gradually positioned themselves within the weapons construction crews. They moved as individuals, avoiding patterns that might alert security systems. They appeared as loyal Imperial soldiers, serving with distinction, asking no questions. But they maintained encrypted communication channels. They gathered intelligence on Starkiller's structural weak points. They identified locations where a coordinated sabotage effort might prove catastrophic to the weapon's functionality. And they waited. Meanwhile, Kratos worked with the Rebel Alliance on a larger strategic shift. If Starkiller was to be destroyed, it couldn't be done through military assault alone. The operation required a different approach, one that combined direct action with political maneuvering, one that exploited the Empire's own internal contradictions. There are elements within the Imperial hierarchy who question Palpatine's supremacy, General Kraken revealed during one strategy session. Military officers who see the Emperor's absolute authority as unsustainable. If we move against Starkiller, if we show that it can be defeated, we might trigger a power struggle within the Empire itself. Palpatine's control is absolute only while his subordinates believe it is absolute, Kratos agreed. Show one crack in the foundation, and others will begin forming. The final phase of preparation involved something that shocked even the Rebel Alliance's most experienced commanders. Kratos reached out through encrypted channels that bypassed conventional military communication to Darth Vader himself. "You allowed us to escape Tosk Prime," Kratos' message stated simply. "I recognized mercy in that choice. I propose that you recognize something else. The futility of serving an emperor whose vision is ultimately stagnation. Join us. Not as Anakin Skywalker. I do not ask you to abandon what you have become. But as Vader, as a being capable of choice, capable of recognizing when loyalty becomes complicity." The response came 3 days later, transmitted through a channel so encrypted that even the Alliance's best cryptographers couldn't trace it. "Skywalker is dead. Vader serves the Emperor, but Vader also sees what you see. That absolute power is a cage. I make you no promises, I offer no alliance, but when the moment comes, know that I will be watching." On the night before the operation, Kratos stood once more at a viewport, watching stars, contemplating the vast machinery of galaxies and wars and individual choices that moved against the backdrop of cosmic indifference. Caleb found him there, the young Jedi having learned over months of service that Kratos often stood vigil before major operations. "We're really doing this," Caleb said. "Tomorrow we attack a planetary superweapon. Tomorrow everything changes, or everything ends." Yes, Kratos replied simply. Are you afraid? Caleb asked. I am cautious, Kratos corrected. Fear implies uncertainty about whether I should act. I am uncertain about the outcome, but not about whether action is necessary. There is a difference. Caleb stood beside the ghost of Sparta, and they watched the stars together. Two beings separated by species, origin, and age, yet united by commitment to a principle. That consciousness, individual will, and the choice to resist tyranny were worth any price. Whatever happens tomorrow, Caleb said, you've already won. You showed the galaxy that the Empire isn't invincible. You showed clones they could be more than their programming. You showed... I have shown nothing, Kratos interrupted gently. I have merely helped reveal what was already true. The rest is up to beings like you, like Cody, like every clone and Jedi and rebel who chooses freedom. Destiny is not written by one being. It is written by millions of choices made by individuals who believe that better futures are possible. The night before Starkiller would be attacked, the night before the final confrontation of the Clone Wars' true legacy would play out across a planetary superweapon, Kratos meditated. Not in the Force as Jedi and Sith understood meditation, but in something deeper, reflection on millennia of warfare, struggle, and the eternal human, or clone, or godlike being, drive toward freedom. Tomorrow, everything would change. And Kratos was finally, after so long, the assault on Starkiller Base began not with the clash of starfighters or the thunder of orbital bombardment, but with silence. Clone Force 99 operatives positioned throughout the superweapons construction zones simultaneously initiated their sabotage protocols at precisely 0300 hours, standard galactic time. Power conduits designed to channel energy across planetary distances went offline. Communication systems linking the weapon's various operational sections began cascading failures. Backup generators, compromised by operatives who'd spent months carefully introducing fatal flaws into their circuitry, refused to activate. The first indication that something was catastrophically wrong came when Admiral Ray Sloan, commanding Starkiller Base's military operations, received reports that approximately 40% of the facility's systems had simultaneously malfunctioned. This cannot be coincidence, Sloan said coldly, her expression hardening as the implications crashed down on her. We have saboteurs, internal infiltrators. Alert all security forces, lock down the base, begin systematic purges of all clone personnel. But by then, it was too late. The Rebel Alliance's assault began the moment Starkiller's defensive grid flickered offline. X-Wing squadrons punched through the weapon's atmospheric shields. Transport ships descended, carrying Clone Force 99's operational units and Rebel ground forces. And at the center of the assault, moving through Starkiller's corridors with the purposeful momentum of a force of nature, was Kratos. The Ghost of Sparta didn't simply fight. He moved through the base like a scourge, his blades of chaos and Leviathan axe cutting through stormtrooper formations with the efficiency of a being who'd spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of warfare. But he didn't kill indiscriminately. He moved with surgical precision, creating pathways for rebel forces to advance, protecting his operatives, ensuring that his extraordinary combat capability served the larger objective rather than becoming an end in itself. Primary reactor accessed, Cody's voice crackled through the communication network. We've got operatives in position. When you give the word, we can initiate the cascade sequence. But once we do, we've got maybe 5 minutes before the entire facility becomes structurally unstable. How many personnel are still in the base? Kratos asked, pausing in his advance to allow a squad of rebel soldiers to pass through the corridor he'd just cleared. Estimates suggest 8,000, Caleb replied, coordinating intelligence from multiple sources. Military personnel, scientists, support staff. If the cascade initiates, we'll have maybe enough time to evacuate half of them. Kratos considered this. 8,000 lives, most of them complicit in building a weapon designed for genocide, yet still lives. 8,000 individuals with their own stories, their own reasons for serving the Empire, their own capacity for redemption or damnation. Allow voluntary evacuation for 30 seconds, Kratos commanded. Broadcast throughout the base that systems are failing, that all personnel should move to designated evacuation points. Give them the choice. Commander, we don't have time, a rebel officer began, but Kratos cut him off. We have exactly as much time as we choose to make, the Ghost of Sparta replied. If we become executioners, if we deliberately trap thousands to achieve military objectives, then we are no better than the Emperor we oppose. Give them the choice. The broadcast went out, echoing through Starkiller's vast corridors and command centers. For 30 seconds, the base became a controlled chaos of personnel rushing toward evacuation zones. Some stormtroopers abandoned their posts to flee. Some scientists made the decision that their work for the Empire was worth dying for and remained at their stations. Some chose neither, stood paralyzed by the choice itself. When the 30 seconds elapsed, Cody initiated the cascade sequence. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The primary reactor's containment field began destabilizing. Secondary systems, compromised by months of sabotage, failed in sequence. The power cascade spread through the weapon's infrastructure like a spreading infection, each failure triggering additional system collapses. Starkiller Base, a planetary superweapon the size of a moon, representing years of Imperial investment and millions of hours of labor, began to tear itself apart. All units to evacuation shuttles now, Kratos commanded, moving through the collapsing facility with the calm focus of someone who'd done this before. Behind him, Clone Force 99 operatives and rebel soldiers fell back in organized retreat, carrying wounded, protecting retreating personnel, maintaining discipline even as the ground beneath their feet shook with structural failure. The superweapon's destruction wasn't clean. It was violent and chaotic and terrifying. Sections of the base collapsed, crushing equipment and occasionally personnel who couldn't move fast enough. The sky above filled with debris as support structures failed and interior sections began imploding. But the evacuation continued. Somehow, impossibly, Kratos' insistence on maintaining moral principles even in the midst of military necessity meant that over 6,000 personnel, stormtroopers, scientists, support staff, escaped alive. They were captured, interrogated, processed into Alliance detention facilities, but they lived, and that mattered. The final transport lifted off as Starkiller's primary superstructure began its final collapse. From orbit, the destruction was visible as a planetary sphere simply ceasing to exist, fragmenting into debris, into scrap metal, and broken dreams and failed ambitions. The Empire's ultimate weapon was gone. The political shockwave that followed was nearly as significant as the military one. Emperor Palpatine's response was swift and brutal. Admiral Ray Sloan and the commanding officers of Starkiller Base were executed for their failure to prevent the sabotage. A witch hunt began throughout the Imperial military as Palpatine's paranoia reached new heights. Officers questioned whether their loyalty was sufficiently absolute, whether they harbored any doubts, whether they might secretly be sympathetic to the rebel cause. The witch hunts created exactly what Kratos had predicted: visible cracks in the foundation of absolute Imperial authority. Military officers began questioning whether service to an emperor who executed commanders for circumstances beyond their control was worth their loyalty. Elements within the Imperial hierarchy began discussing succession protocols, discussing what would happen if Palpatine were suddenly removed, and most crucially, The destruction of Starkiller proved to the galaxy that the Rebel Alliance was no longer a scattered insurgency. It was a genuine military force capable of striking at the Empire's most important installations. 3 weeks after Starkiller's destruction, Darth Vader requested a private meeting with Emperor Palpatine. What transpired in that throne room was never fully documented, but the aftermath was apparent. Vader's status changed. He was no longer the Emperor's immediate enforcer, but rather a field commander given operational autonomy in the Outer Rim. Some observers interpreted this as a punishment. Others understood it as something closer to mercy, Palpatine allowing his Dark Lord a degree of operational independence that suggested a crack in their master-servant relationship. The truth, which only Vader understood, was far more complex. Months passed. The Rebel Alliance, emboldened by Starkiller's destruction and swelling with defector clone forces and Force-sensitive survivors, began launching increasingly ambitious operations. An Imperial research facility on Scarif was hit. A Star Destroyer manufacturing center in the Inner Rim was sabotaged. Clone units began openly defecting in larger numbers, with Clone Force 99 becoming the flagship unit of the Rebel Alliance's military operations. But even as military success mounted, a deeper struggle was taking place within the consciousness of the galaxy itself. Kratos spent less time in combat operations and more time in the messy business of building something that would outlast warfare. A philosophy, a movement, a genuine transformation in how beings understood power and freedom. He worked with Rebel Alliance politicians to articulate a vision of post-imperial governance that didn't simply replace the Emperor with a new authority, but instead created space for genuine individual agency and representative democracy. He worked with Clone Force 99 to establish programs that would help clones transitioning from military service develop identities beyond soldier, beyond tool, beyond instrument of war. He worked with Caleb and other Force-sensitive survivors to develop training frameworks that taught the Force as a tool for understanding and growth rather than power over others. It was unglamorous work, lacking the dramatic clarity of direct combat. But it was, Kratos understood, far more important. One evening, as he stood watching a sunset over the Rebel Alliance's new base on Dantooine, Cody approached him with a datapad filled with intelligence reports. The latest communications intercepts suggest Palpatine is preparing something, Cody said. Something big. Something that might be his response to Starkiller's destruction. Our intelligence officers think he's planning a massive assault, an attempt to completely eliminate the Rebel Alliance before we can grow any stronger. Kratos studied the reports, understanding immediately what they meant. The final confrontation was approaching. The war that had begun with clones and Jedi, transformed through 5 years of Empire, was now entering its decisive phase. "How long do we have?" Kratos asked. "Estimates vary," Cody replied. "Weeks, maybe less. The Emperor appears to be accelerating his timeline." Kratos nodded slowly, his ancient eyes reflecting the Dantooine sunset. "Then we make our final preparation. We gather all the strength we have built. We bring together Clone Force 99, the remaining Jedi survivors, the Alliance's military forces, and we prepare for the battle that will define this war." "Are you afraid?" Cody asked. The same question Caleb had asked months before, on the night before Starkiller's assault. "No," Kratos replied. "I have spent millennia fighting. I have learned that fear is only relevant when you don't understand what you're fighting for. I understand now. We fight for consciousness itself. We fight for the ability of individuals to make choices about their own existence. We fight because slavery, whether imposed by gods or emperors or programming, is fundamentally unjust." He turned to face the clone commander, and his expression was one of profound clarity. "Whatever comes, Cody, we have already succeeded. We have shown that change is possible. We have demonstrated that even the mightiest systems can be disrupted by those willing to act. The battle ahead may determine the fate of this particular galaxy, but the principle we've established will outlive any single outcome. That night, communications went out across the Rebel Alliance's scattered network. All Clone Force 99 units were recalled to base. All surviving Jedi were called to coordinated positions. All Alliance resources were marshaled toward preparation for the confrontation everyone understood was coming. The Ghost of Sparta, the warrior god who'd invaded the Star Wars galaxy seeking peace and found only the necessity of endless struggle, stood at the center of preparations, understanding that his role in this galaxy's transformation was entering its final act. Behind him lay centuries of preparation in other realms, 5 years of teaching consciousness to the enslaved, months of building the infrastructure of genuine resistance. Ahead lay the moment where all those efforts would either bear fruit or be consumed by the machinery of the Empire's final counterattack. And Kratos, with the patience of the eternally ancient and the urgency of one who understood that even immortal warriors eventually face their final battle, prepared himself and those around him for what was to come. The true war, not the Clone Wars, not the rebel uprising. The Battle of Endor began not as a single engagement, but as a cascade of conflicts spreading across multiple theaters simultaneously. Emperor Palpatine, in his absolute confidence that military supremacy guaranteed political supremacy, had concentrated the Empire's remaining major forces, including a partially completed second Death Star and the Imperial fleet itself, in preparation for what he believed would be the final crushing of rebel resistance. What Palpatine had not anticipated was that Kratos had spent the intervening months coordinating with elements of the Imperial military itself. Admiral Akbar commanded the Rebel Alliance's naval forces, but the strategy had been developed in collaboration with Kratos and an unlikely ally, Darth Vader. The Dark Lord, moving through the shadowy spaces between overt loyalty and hidden betrayal, had provided intelligence on Imperial fleet deployments, weaknesses in the Death Star's new defensive systems, and most crucially, the location of Palpatine's meditation chamber, the one place the Emperor believed himself absolutely secure. On the forest moon of Endor, Clone Force 99 units engaged Imperial stormtroopers in dense woodland terrain where superior numbers and advanced technology meant far less than tactical cunning and intimate knowledge of enemy capabilities. Cody led the assault, moving with the practiced efficiency of a soldier who'd spent years preparing for exactly this scenario. But the true focus of the operation was Kratos' direct assault on the Death Star itself. The Ghost of Sparta boarded the superweapon with a small team of elite operatives, Caleb Doom, a handful of Clone Force 99 specialists, and most surprisingly, a contingent of stormtroopers who'd defected at the final moment, their consciousness awakened through years of exposure to clone collective messaging. They moved through the Death Star's corridors with the coordination of beings who'd trained together for months, their objective singular: reach the Emperor's throne room and prevent Palpatine from implementing the final stage of his plan, a massive force discharge designed to annihilate the rebel fleet in a single cataclysmic burst. Resistance is lighter than anticipated, Caleb reported, as they passed through a command sector largely abandoned by Imperial personnel. Many stormtroopers, facing orders that contradicted their fundamental understanding of military discipline, had simply abandoned their posts rather than choose between conscience and compliance. "The Empire's greatest weakness," Kratos replied, moving forward with his characteristic purposeful momentum, "is that it depends absolutely on obedience from those it has trained to think. Once that obedience is disrupted, the entire structure becomes fragile." They encountered resistance near the throne room's approach, elite Imperial guards, the Emperor's personal bodyguards, warriors fanatically devoted to Palpatine's vision. The battle was fierce and brutal, yet ultimately brief. Kratos' combat mastery, combined with Caleb's force-enhanced speed and the operative's tactical coordination, overwhelmed the Imperial guards. When Kratos finally stood before Palpatine's throne room doors, they opened as if in greeting. The Emperor sat upon his throne, surrounded by the apparatus of power, communication systems, force amplification devices, the mechanisms through which he exercised control across the entire galactic structure. His aged features were arranged in an expression that was almost welcoming. "Kratos," Palpatine said, his voice carrying the rasp of centuries and dark side corruption. "At last we meet directly. The ghost has come to challenge the Emperor." "I have come to end your reign," Kratos replied, stepping into the throne room with Caleb and two of the most skilled operatives at his side. "Not through personal combat, though I am prepared for that, but through the recognition that your power rests on illusion, the illusion that absolute authority can be maintained indefinitely, that consciousness can be permanently suppressed, that individuals will always choose obedience over freedom." Palpatine rose from his throne, and the force energy around him began to crackle with barely contained power. "You speak of freedom as though it is a virtue. I have seen freedom. It is chaos. It is weakness. It is the death of order. I have spent centuries ensuring that this galaxy would never again descend into the anarchy of individual choice. You have spent centuries ensuring that individuals never threaten your control," Kratos corrected. "That is not preserving order. That is perpetuating slavery." The throne room erupted into chaos. Palpatine unleashed a maelstrom of dark side energy. Force lightning so intense it seemed to fill the entire chamber, dark side manifestations that warped reality itself. Caleb raised a protective barrier, his connection to the Force straining under the assault. The operatives took defensive positions, weapons raised, understanding they were facing power that transcended military capability. And Kratos advanced directly into the storm. The ghost of Sparta moved through Palpatine's force assault with the single-minded determination that had allowed him to survive every apocalypse, every god trial, every impossible enemy across millennia. His blades of chaos, infused with magic older than the Force itself, cut through dark side manifestations. His Leviathan axe, channeling frost magic of the Norse realms, created pockets of stability in the chaos around him. But for the first time facing this Emperor, Kratos understood that direct confrontation was not the path to victory. Palpatine's power was vast, nearly unlimited, drawn from centuries of dark side study and the accumulated force energy of trillions of enslaved minds. To overcome him through combat alone would require a power level Kratos did not possess. Yet Palpatine made a critical error. Confident in his superiority, convinced that no individual could withstand his power, the Emperor focused entirely on Kratos, on the one being in the chamber who seemed capable of challenging him directly. This meant he ignored Caleb, who was not attacking, but instead doing something far more subtle. Reaching out through the Force to the millions of clones across the galaxy, to the awakened consciousness that Kratos had spent years cultivating. In that moment, as Palpatine's full attention was consumed by Kratos, Caleb opened a Force connection to Clone Force 99's operatives throughout the galaxy. The effect was immediate and cascading. Stormtroopers across the Death Star and on Endor simultaneously received a Force-transmitted understanding. They were more than their programming. They were individuals. They had the capacity to choose. And in that instant of choice, hundreds of clones laid down their weapons and refused to continue serving. The Imperial military structure, dependent on absolute obedience from its clone-derived forces, began to collapse from within. More importantly, in the throne room itself, the cascade of consciousness reached the Emperor's most elite guards, clones who'd been held even further under control than regular stormtroopers through additional conditioning. They, too, suddenly understood what they were: enslaved beings with the capacity for freedom. The synchronized action of millions of clones across the galaxy, all choosing consciousness over compliance in a single instant, created a disruption in the Force so profound that even Palpatine felt it. For just a moment, the briefest possible instant, the Emperor's concentration wavered. It was enough. Kratos, moving with the speed and precision that came from 10,000 years of combat experience, drove his blades of chaos toward Palpatine's physical form. The Emperor, defending himself with force barriers rather than direct physical defense, found himself suddenly vulnerable. The Emperor of the Empire fell, his body struck down, not by a force wielder superior in dark side knowledge, but by an ancient warrior fighting for principles the Emperor had never comprehended. Yet even as Palpatine fell, something unexpected occurred. Darth Vader, monitoring the battle through Imperial communication channels, understood that the endgame had arrived. The moment he'd been both dreading and hoping for had finally come. Anakin Skywalker's death had been delayed decades too long, yet remained inevitable. But before the Emperor could fully expire, before the throne room could descend into complete chaos, Vader arrived. The Dark Lord entered with the thunderous presence of a being who'd spent years as the enforcer of absolute authority. He looked first at Kratos, then at the fallen Emperor, then at Caleb, the young Jedi whose Force signature Vader recognized as fundamentally connected to the Skywalker bloodline in ways only another Force-sensitive could perceive. "Leave," Vader commanded, his breathing mechanism filling the chamber with its distinctive rhythm. "Take the girl. Leave this place. Let the Empire fall. It is complete." "The girl," Caleb said, confused, until Vader gestured toward a viewport where, below on Endor, a young woman with Force sensitivity was engaging Imperial stormtroopers. The Dark Lord's awareness, focused through the Force, perceived what others had missed, a presence that echoed with Skywalker bloodline resonance. "She is mine to protect," Vader said simply. "She is my legacy, more important than any Emperor, any Force philosophy, any vision of order or chaos." Kratos understood in that moment what was happening. Anakin Skywalker, buried beneath armor and dark side corruption for so long, had finally chosen a priority greater than service to tyranny: family. The protection of a being connected to his own bloodline. "Go," Kratos said to the others. "Return to the fleet. Ensure the transmission of what has occurred reaches across the galaxy. This war is ending." As the operatives retreated, as Caleb led the assault teams toward evacuation, as the Death Star's systems began their final cascading failures, Kratos faced Darth Vader in the throne room. They did not fight. Instead, they stood in silence, two warriors who'd faced each other before, who'd learned respect for one another despite opposing philosophies. "You have won," Vader said finally. "The Emperor is dead. The Empire will fragment. What comes next?" "What comes next," Kratos replied, "is up to millions of beings making conscious choices about their futures. I can only ensure that they have the freedom to make those choices. The future itself will be written by countless hands, not by any single warrior or leader." Vader was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached up and removed his helmet. For the first time in decades, Anakin Skywalker's face was exposed to the air, scarred, aged, but undeniably human. When he spoke, his voice was different without the respirator's filtration, younger, haunted, but oddly at peace. "Thank you," Anakin said simply, "for showing me that consciousness, individual will, matters more than power or programming, for reminding me that even in the depths of serving tyranny, choice remains possible. "You still have much to do," Kratos replied. "That young woman on Endor, she will need guidance in understanding her force connection. And the galaxy will need voices like yours, former servants of the Empire who understand its machinery and can help build something better." Anakin replaced his helmet and nodded. "I will find her. I will protect her. And I will ensure that no Emperor ever again attempts to suppress consciousness itself." He turned toward the exit, then paused. "What will you do now, Ghost of Sparta?" Kratos looked out through the throne room's vast viewports at the space battle still raging. Rebel Alliance vessels engaging Imperial Star Destroyers, the Imperial fleet fragmenting as command structures collapsed and clone pilots joined the resistance effort. "I will continue what I have always done," Kratos replied. "I will teach those willing to learn that consciousness is strength, that individual will is power, that freedom has infinite value. And I will stand against any attempt to recreate the machinery of slavery in whatever form it emerges." Behind him, the Emperor's throne room was already being dismantled by sabotage and structural failure. The Death Star, like Starkiller before it, was beginning its final descent into destruction. But this time, the victory felt different. This time, Kratos understood that he hadn't won a war so much as opened a door. Behind that door lay infinite possibility, futures shaped not by single leaders or rulers, but by the conscious choices of individuals learning, for perhaps the first time in this galaxy, that freedom was worth fighting for. The Clone Wars were over. The rebellion had succeeded. The Empire was falling. And across the galaxy, millions of clones, formerly slaves, now awakened to consciousness. The aftermath of Endor reshaped the galaxy in ways both immediate and profound. The Galactic Empire, dependent on Palpatine's absolute authority and the unquestioning obedience of clone forces, fragmented into competing factions almost immediately. Some Imperial holdouts attempted to maintain control through brute force. Others, recognizing the futility of resistance against an awakened population, negotiated terms of surrender or exile. Still others simply dissolved into chaos, their hierarchies collapsing when the illusion of inevitable authority was shattered. Clone Force 99 became the foundation of the new Galactic Alliance's military structure, but fundamentally transformed by their experience. Under Cody's leadership and Kratos' philosophical guidance, the clones evolved from soldiers following orders into something unprecedented. A military force genuinely accountable to democratic governance, capable of independent thought, committed to protecting freedom rather than enforcing tyranny. They became the living embodiment of consciousness, choosing to serve a cause greater than themselves. Caleb Doom and the surviving Jedi established new training academies, but ones fundamentally different from the old temple. Rather than enforcing dogma about balance and detachment, they taught force sensitivity as a tool for understanding and growth, applicable to warriors and healers, philosophers and artists alike. The Force itself became less a mystery, demanding obedience, and more a resource available to all capable of perceiving it. Most surprisingly, Anakin Skywalker, who'd briefly ruled as Dark Lord under Palpatine before the Emperor's fall, chose a path few anticipated. He withdrew from galactic politics, rejecting both the Jedi Order and Imperial structures. Instead, he dedicated himself to finding and training Force-sensitive individuals across the Outer Rim, focusing particularly on those born into slavery or servitude. His goal was singular: ensuring that no young Force user would ever again feel compelled to seek power through manipulation or domination. His daughter, discovered on Endor and trained in the ways of conscious Force use, became his partner in this work. Kratos, the being who'd invaded this galaxy as an outsider, became something unexpected, a legend that transcended military achievement or political maneuvering. He became a symbol of resistance itself, the living proof that even the mightiest systems could be disrupted by individuals committed to freedom. Yet he remained fundamentally uncomfortable with reverence or mythology. He continued the work he'd begun on Camino, moving through the galaxy, teaching clone soldiers and other oppressed populations that consciousness was their birthright and that individual will was the most valuable asset any being possessed. The clone collective evolved beyond military organization into something closer to a philosophy, a distributed network of awakened beings committed to ensuring that authoritarian systems never again took root in this corner of the galaxy. Not through violence or forced ideology, but through quiet, persistent demonstrations that consciousness, individual choice, and freedom were possible even within rigid structures. Years passed. The Galactic Alliance stabilized, becoming a genuine representative democracy rather than a new empire under different leadership. The scars of the Clone Wars, the trillions of lives lost, the civilizations destroyed, the centuries of conflict, remained indelible marks on the galaxy's consciousness. Yet something fundamentally had shifted. A generation of clones, for the first time in their existence, would grow old, knowing they'd made choices about their own lives. Future populations would grow up in systems where individual will was recognized as legitimate rather than suppressed as threat. It was imperfect. Democracy proved messier than tyranny, more complicated, sometimes infuriatingly inefficient. Communities struggled with how to incorporate beings born as slaves into societies built on individual autonomy. Some clone survivors never fully adjusted to freedom, their neural patterns too deeply conditioned by obedience. Others thrived, becoming artists, philosophers, scientists, farmers, pursuing lives their programming never would have permitted. The larger question, whether this transformation would endure, whether future generations would maintain commitment to freedom or gradually reconstruct new systems of control under different names, remained unanswered. But that uncertainty itself represented victory. The tyranny of absolute predictability had been broken. Kratos stood once more at a viewport, watching stars from an observation deck on the restored world of Camino. Below, the cloning facilities, no longer manufacturing soldiers, but transformed into research and medical centers, bustled with activity. Clone populations worked alongside beings from 100 different species, building something genuinely new. Commander Cody approached, now older, marked by scars and time in ways acceleration never would have permitted before Kratos' arrival. The clone wore civilian clothes rather than armor, a choice that still felt foreign after a lifetime in uniform. The Council of Clone Representatives approved the final legislative framework, Cody reported. Full citizenship rights for all clones, regardless of when they were created or what service they provided. Representation in all galactic governance structures. Access to all educational and career paths previously restricted to naturally born beings. And those who resist this? Kratos asked. There are always those who resist, Cody replied with a slight smile. Some believe clones should remain subordinate because of our origins. Some believe we should form separatist governments because of our shared genetics and experience. But the majority, the vast majority, are simply trying to figure out how to live as individuals in a galaxy that's finally allowing us that possibility. Kratos nodded slowly, understanding that this was the nature of real freedom. It was messy, complicated, never fully resolved, always requiring constant work to maintain. There's something else, Cody said, his expression becoming more serious. We've received reports from deep space, beyond the known galaxy. There are other civilizations, other empires, other systems of control and domination. Some of them have already detected signs of the rebellion's success. They're beginning to ask questions about whether their own populations might aspire to consciousness. The work never ends, Kratos replied simply. No, Cody agreed. I suppose it doesn't. That's what you taught us, though. Freedom isn't a destination. It's an ongoing choice, made every day, by millions of individuals deciding that consciousness matters more than comfort, that individual will matters more than security. Kratos turned from the viewport to face the clone commander directly. You have become a philosopher, Cody. It suits you better than the uniform ever did. I had a good teacher, Cody replied. That night, Kratos received a message through secure channels, a communication from Caleb Doom, now recognized as one of the Jedi Order's most influential teachers despite his youth and unconventional methods. The message was brief. The Force whispers of your future. I see threads of possibility extending outward toward challenges and conflicts you've never encountered. This galaxy's transformation is only beginning, and your role in it is far from complete. Kratos understood what the young Jedi was suggesting. The work across this galaxy, teaching consciousness, building resistance to tyranny, establishing freedom, was never truly finished. There were always new threats, new forms of oppression emerging, new populations requiring awakening to the possibility of choice. Yet he also understood something Caleb perhaps hadn't fully grasped. Sometimes the greatest gift a teacher could give was to step back and allow students to carry forward the work independently. Cody didn't need Kratos' guidance anymore. The clones had learned the fundamental lesson and could now teach it to others. Caleb and the Jedi were establishing frameworks for Force training that didn't depend on any single figure. The Rebel Alliance had transformed into genuine democratic governance. The Ghost of Sparta, who'd invaded this galaxy seeking peace and instead found endless struggle, began contemplating a different kind of future. Perhaps there were other galaxies, other systems of oppression requiring disruption, other populations learning for the first time that consciousness was possible, that individual will could challenge even the mightiest structures. Or perhaps the time had come to simply rest, to stand in observance rather than action, to watch as those he'd trained carried forward the work of building genuine freedom. The choice, Kratos understood with the clarity that came from millennia of experience, was his to make. And that itself was the ultimate victory, a being so long enslaved by gods, by prophecy, by duty, finally arriving at a moment where genuine freedom was possible, where the future was truly uncertain, truly open, truly shaped by nothing but the individual will of those living it. As Kamino's endless waters lapped against the landing platforms below, as a new generation of free clones and awakened beings worked to build something better than anything that had come before, Kratos smiled. The work had been long, the struggle had been eternal. But somewhere in the process of teaching others about freedom, the Ghost of Sparta had finally found his own. And in a galaxy learning to embrace consciousness rather than suppress it, that freedom rippled outward in ways no single being could have predicted or contained. The Clone Wars were truly over. The age of empires was ending, and the age of genuine individual possibility had only just begun. May the Force be with you. More stories await.